We started with polling this hour. Imagine the difference from what we just heard from Cliff Young at Ipsos to what we're seeing in the poly market, where this is a slam dunk for Donald Trump. There's been some reporting around this too, that some very well-heeled, very few traders are helping to turn this in Trump's favor, placing bets, and it's something that Bloomberg's Alexandra Semenova is writing about. Poly market influence on Wall Street grows despite red flags. Alexandra, thanks for joining us. You're at World Headquarters in New York. What are you seeing here in this massive spread in the poly market that doesn't seem to jive with the public polling?
Hey, Joe, so you would think that the overwhelming reaction from Wall Street to poly market would be to kind of gawk at the idea of taking this website seriously. These are the so-called smart money folks who have an inherent disdain for cryptocurrency and betting markets, and yet we're seeing some major financial institutions really paying attention to the odds on poly market that obviously overwhelmingly favor Trump. You have JP Morgan, for example, their trading desk is saying that they're looking at these odds to create long and short baskets of stocks that will rise and fall depending on the election outcome. So they're weaving that into their election game plan. And then you have firms like Bernstein and Standard Chartered also citing poly market in their research notes and in conversations with clients. And based on the sources that I'm speaking to, their reaction is kind of like, yes, we are skeptical about this website, but so many clients are interested in what it is saying. And because the election is so close, they're looking for any kind of signal, any kind of indication of what might happen next week.
Yeah, it's interesting we talk about poly market. People should understand how this works, by the way. The resolution on these contracts, the resolution source for this market is the Associated Press, right, calling the race, Fox News, and NBC. It says this market will resolve once all three sources call the race for the same candidate. If all three sources have not called for the race, by the inaugural, January 20th, the market will resolve based on who is inaugurated. So this could go on for some time here. Robinhood has contracts right now, Alexandra. Of course, we've talked a lot about Kalshi. They're all a bit different in their own way, but telling very similar stories.
Yeah, indeed. But the interesting thing with poly market, obviously, is that there are so many caveats to this website. First and foremost, people in the U.S. aren't allowed to use it, so it doesn't really reflect the sentiment of American voters unlike some of its peers. And then also there was a report yesterday, a couple of reports actually, that it is ridden with wash trading. That's basically a form of market manipulation. So obviously the odds here are not really something that, or something that you have to take with a grain of salt, rather. And then, of course, it really attracts the cryptocurrency crowds, which have a bias towards Trump. And that's why when you look at, this website, it shows Trump winning by a much wider margin than some of the other prediction platforms.
Either way, somebody's going to lose a lot of money next week, right?
Indeed. It's going to be an interesting time.
No doubt. Come talk to us. Actually, I'll be up there, Alexandra. I'll meet you in that studio to find out how this plays out. We'll say midweek next week, but that may be wishful thinking. Alexandra Semenova, thank you so much for the time today, and a great piece of work here. Poly market influence on Wall Street growing despite red flags. There are red flags on both sides. Nobody has any idea. So I guess if you're up for some risk, maybe you can make some money. Our signature panel's up next. Get your reflector vests ready as we navigate the most recent narrative here having to do with garbage. Donald Trump in a garbage truck. Didn't think we'd see that in this campaign, but it's coming up next on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. OpenAI is crafting a direct challenge to Google by adding a search function to ChatGPT. This option is called ChatGPT Search and will let the chatbot's users search for timely information and get responses with inline attribution to news publishers and other data sources. Paying customers will have access to the search function as soon as today. Educational and enterprise customers will have access in a few weeks. Free customers will have to wait a few months. The Federal Reserve's preferred measure of underlying U.S. inflation posted its biggest monthly gain since April. That bolstered the case for a slower pace of interest rate cuts after last month's outsized reduction. We check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P is down 82 points, NASDAQ down 428 points, and the Dow is down 271 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.29%, and the 2-year yield is at 4.16%. Ford's electric pickup truck, the F-150 Lightning, saw sales pick up this year. It just wasn't enough. Now, Ford plans to shut down the plant that produces that electric vehicle through the end of this year. They're beginning a 7-week shutdown in mid-November. A judge in Philadelphia held a brief hearing this morning in a bid to shut down Elon Musk's $1 million-a-day sweepstakes in battleground states. The judge put the state case on hold while Elon Musk tries to have it moved to a federal court. You can join a special edition of Bloomberg Technology live at 6 o'clock tonight on Bloomberg Radio and Television for a conversation with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger. That's 6 p.m. Eastern here on Bloomberg Radio, on Bloomberg Television, and on YouTube. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back now to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
Amy Morris, thank you so much. Watching Wall Street for us here all week on Balance of Power as we talk politics from Washington. We've got financial markets covered. Did I say happy Halloween? It does seem to be remarkable timing, doesn't it? That we celebrate Halloween, if I can use the term celebrate here, as the cosplay campaign comes into full form. Surely you were watching the garbage man routine last night. And by the way, this is working for a lot of people. I suspect maybe half of them. Donald Trump coming off the garbage flap, which I won't spend too much time reanimating here. The joke at Madison Square Garden Sunday night. Island of floating garbage, Puerto Rico, right? Condemnation from the Harris campaign, the Biden White House. Then the next flap, Joe Biden talking to Voto Latino says Trump supporters are garbage, didn't mean it, clarified the remarks. And look who shows up on the campaign trail yesterday in a garbage truck, wearing the full regalia, the big orange reflector vest. Donald Trump, just days after his foray into fast food, where he wore the outfit of a different type of shift worker, the fry cook at a McDonald's. He's now pretending to be a garbage man. Even got the garbage truck, brand new, shiny, painted with the Trump logo on the side. They drove it around a circle in the parking lot for a while. This is a made-for-media moment. And the former president got in the truck to take questions about Puerto Rico. Here he is.
I love Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico loves me. I don't know anything about a comedian. I love Puerto Rico. Nobody's done more for Puerto Rico than me.
Nobody's done more for Puerto Rico than me. He then went on to deliver a full speech. He did the full rally wearing the orange reflector vest. Let's assemble our panel on this Halloween. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Democratic analyst, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor, political science professor at Iona University. Rick Davis, partner, Stone Court Capital, Republican strategist, and Bloomberg Politics contributor. Rick, is this good politics? I actually don't know.
Look, I mean, we're talking about it. Had a huge viral sensation going. It'll be interesting to see how long it lasts. Very similar to the reaction that he got from flipping hamburgers and dishing fries at the McDonald's. Look, it's a political stunt. I know candidates who campaigned the entire cycle by working a different job, talking about how they understand the plight of the working man. Here's a situation where I don't think Donald Trump implies that, but he certainly represents it. Look, for Donald Trump to put on a safety vest, people are going to talk about that. To climb on board of a garbage truck, that's even more interesting. So Yeah, the fact that he wants a lot of attention and he wants to get his folks happy and excited about voting, this is all good.
Yeah. Is there another side to this, Jeannie? A multi-billionaire patronizing shift workers by dressing up and pretending to be them for 15 minutes at a pop? There he is getting into the truck. If you're with us on YouTube, he had a little trouble getting up there. If that had been Joe Biden, we would be talking about that too. But Jeannie, is there another side to the way people might interpret these optics?
Oh, there certainly is. But first of all, can I say, Joe, since it's Halloween, I have to say Happy Halloween.
Yeah.
But also,
well, thank you.
I don't normally find Tom Cotton too funny, but if you look on his Twitter, he does have a funny bit relevant to what you were just talking about. He says something like the Biden-Harris economy is so bad that seniors have to work 2 jobs, and he has Donald Trump in McDonald's, and he has Donald Trump in the garbage truck with his little vest on. So I thought it was pretty good, but whoever came up with that, maybe it was Senator Cotton himself.
We're all going there now, Jeannie.
Yeah, I'll go there. It's pretty good, I have to say. But the reality is there is another side to this. And of course, this is part of, Donald Trump's hyper masculine attempt to reach out to these hard to get male voters by going in this garbage truck, trying to do so with good humor, and to try to get these folks out to vote. The problem for him is, of course, it's not a great way to get out women. And of course, neither are his statements about women, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that is what they are doing. And the other part of this, I think, if you're running Donald Trump's campaign, the last thing you want him out there doing is talking about the fact that he is going to raise tariffs and potentially, hurt the economy. That's not a bright, cheery way to get people out to vote. So you give him an outfit, tell him to get in a garbage truck. He's happy and you're happy. So I think there's a method to the madness, and we'll have to see if it works.
Well, I'm just, what has changed since Mike Dukakis got in the tank, Rick? Is this any different? I mean, a presidential candidate putting on a reflector vest, getting in a garbage truck, that would be an assumed fail in any other election. But here we see it working, I guess, for Donald Trump. Have things changed, or is Trump just different?
Oh, I think Trump is different. I think there's something to a billionaire climbing on board a garbage truck. The transition to that is pretty strong. Michael Dukakis had a lot of problems besides hopping in a tank. But I do believe that the worst thing about the tank was the hat. Watch out what kind of hat you wear if you're a candidate. And so, look, all these are optics. They amount to things that people see, cast a lot of messaging around it. And look, I mean, kudos to Trump for not backing off of the whole Puerto Rico attack. I mean, he was getting crushed by this after his Madison Square Garden thing. And then, Joe Biden throws him a lifeline by, misstepping into the cesspool of garbage. And the reality is they've been smart enough to be really quick, turned it around, and have now made it a strong point for their campaign. That kind of agility is hard to find in a campaign.
What do you think about that, Jeannie? I want to bring you to something else that Donald Trump said last night. But has he turned the tables on this issue, or was the original offense at Madison Square Garden the original sin here, the one that matters in terms of driving away Latino voters?
Yeah, I see it completely opposite. Sure, he can make a joke out of this, but the reality is we are looking at about 4% of undecided voters in 7 swing states. He is so undisciplined that as opposed to talking about what can win him this election, which is the economy, which is immigration and issues that people are very unhappy with the Biden administration about, he's reminding people, those people who stuck with Nikki Haley, even though she was out of the race, everything they didn't like about him. He's undisciplined. He is crazy. He is a comedian. He is not serious. He is talking about things like Puerto Rico, a territory of the United States, being garbage. So I don't see this as a good strategy for the campaign. I think they're doing the best that they can with an undisciplined candidate. But I think this is what threatens to lose him this election. He should win this historically because Joe Biden is that unpopular and that tagged to Kamala Harris. And yet he cannot stay on message. And doubling down on the garbage thing just reminds all those women out there and those undecided voters everything they didn't like about Donald Trump to begin with.
Well, he had a message for women in Green Bay. Let's listen to Donald Trump with the reflector vest from last night.
I want to protect the women of our country. I want to protect the women. Sir, please don't say that. Why? They said we think it's very inappropriate for you to say. I said, why? I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
Okay, so that's another headline that we're waking up to this morning. Whether the women want me to or not, Kamala Harris did respond to this, that as president, he says he will protect the women of our country. Whether they like it or not, I'm going to protect them. Again, this is Kamala Harris. Could we play the vice president responding to what Donald Trump said in Green Bay? She too was in Wisconsin. Let's listen.
It actually is, I think, very offensive to women in terms of not understanding their agency, their authority, their right, and their ability to make decisions about their own lives, including their own bodies. He is not going to be fighting for women's reproductive rights. He does not prioritize the freedom of women and the intelligence of women to make decisions about their own lives and bodies.
Jeannie, I'm going to stick with you for a moment here because you pointed us in this direction. How much of a liability is this issue for Donald Trump when he's talking about it in this way, whether you want him to or not?
It is absolutely an enormous liability. And you heard him say it. The most bizarre thing about this, amongst many things, it's not only so condescending, but he goes through step by step the advice he got from his campaign, which was, please don't double down on this. Please back off of this. This is not helping with the group of people who vote the most in this country and who are supporting your opponent in double digits. Don't double down on this. And yet he walks us through their thinking and then says, no, I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to be the protector of women, whether they like it or not. And everybody should look at the great reporting in ProPublica today to tell people what is happening to women on the ground, like the young woman who in Texas who died because she could not get the care she needed during a miscarriage in the hospital. This is what is happening to women, given what Donald Trump has said he did successfully, which was change the Supreme Court so it overturned Roe v. Wade and passed the Dobbs decision. So women know this, people know this, it's not just women, and this is a real misstep is probably the kindest way to put it on the part of Donald Trump, and the campaign has got to be, just rolling over behind the scenes.
What do you make of this, Rick? This is another situation where you wonder if it's actually impacting an undecided voter. Most women have probably decided where they fall on this by now, and we know a third of Americans have already voted. Does this matter in the end what Donald Trump said last night in terms of the result of this election?
Yeah, I don't know if we can predict an outcome. Look, I think that the dozens of sexual assault claims against Donald Trump, some of which have been proven in court, is probably a lot worse and is more deep-seated than anything he's going to say this week, short of an Access Hollywood type conversation. The reality, too, is you really need to understand, Donald Trump is a showman, right? We don't know if his campaign told him not to say this stuff. He creates these kinds of scenarios just to tell these stories. And so the reality is it just as well could be that he's looking at women vote coming out in slightly larger margins than they did in the past in the early vote. He really doesn't want that. If women are voting ahead of like 52%, it doesn't bode well for him. And if he's reading the numbers, that would be enough for him to want to try and tell this story. So the reality is he's got issues in that category that are deep-seated in the long term, and none of this is going to change any of that.
It's going to take us a long time to unpack this election. With 5 days to go, our signature panel, and they'll be back in our second hour. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors, tackling the wacky stuff here. I told you it's silly season. It's actually Halloween, and the candidate, well, one of them, the candidate's dressing up. Kamala Harris will be following along with Donald Trump today in the Sun Belt, as we mentioned. Harris heading to Phoenix, and Reno will be in Las Vegas later today. Donald Trump, Henderson, Nevada, strangely, Albuquerque. Why not? New Mexico is nice this time of year. It's just not a swing state. Much more ahead. Kaylee Lyons will join. We're going to be talking with Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin the day after both candidates touch down in her state again. As you would expect, right here, constant coverage on this election on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
Joe, visiting from San Francisco. How do you think about the role of technological advances, especially generative AI, on more traditional industries? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know anything about AI. That doesn't mean I deny its existence or importance or anything of the sort. And last year I said, that we let a genie out of the bottle when we developed nuclear weapons, and that genie has been doing some terrible things lately, and the power of that genie is what scares the hell out of me. And on the other hand, I don't know any way to get the genie back in the bottle. And AI is somewhat similar. It's part of way out of the bottle, and it's enormously important, and it's going to be done by somebody. So we may wish we'd never seen that genie, or may do wonderful things, and I'm certainly not the person that can evaluate that. And I probably wouldn't have been the person that could have evaluated it during I had one experience that does make me a little nervous, and I'll just explain it. That very, very recently, fairly recently, I saw an image in front of my eyes on the screen, and it was me, and it was my voice, and wearing the kind of clothes I wear, and my wife or my daughter wouldn't have been able to detect any difference, and it was delivering a message that no way came from me. So when you think of the potential for scamming people, if you can reproduce images that I can't even tell, that say, I need money, it's your daughter, I've just had a car crash, I need $50,000 wired. I mean, scamming has always been part of the American scene.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Presidential candidates head for the Sun Belt. Welcome to the fastest show in politics, with only 5 days to Election Day and a campaign narrative that continues to surround the word garbage. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Thank you for joining. on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kaylee, happy Halloween.
Yeah.
You don't seem to have your reflector vest on.
No, but Donald Trump certainly did yesterday, literally taking a ride in a garbage truck.
Yeah.
He leans in to the gaffe made by President Biden earlier this week when he referred to Trump supporters as garbage, or maybe one singular supporter if the White House is to be believed. Nonetheless, what it does show is that is a distraction for the Harris campaign that does not want to have to be talking about this as she campaigns in the critical states of Nevada and Arizona.
That's true. Look, there are a lot of questions about the extent to which Joe Biden, with his remark that you referred to in that Voto Latino conference, stepped on Kamala Harris's closing argument at the Ellipse the other night. We didn't talk about that a lot yesterday. We talked about the gaffe today.
Yep.
We're talking about the garbage truck.
Yeah, we're also talking about Donald Trump, of course, as he swings through some of these very same states. Interestingly, though, in New Mexico today, this is not a state we would consider a battleground, has raised some eyebrows as there is now just 5 days to go until Election Day.
Road to the White House apparently goes through Albuquerque. That is where the former president will be, although they're both technically in swing states. He'll get to Nevada later. That is also where we're going to find Kamala Harris today and in Arizona, because it really does come down to these 7 states. So we're going to talk more about that in Wisconsin specifically, where they both were yesterday, with Congresswoman Gwen Moore, the Democrat from Wisconsin, watching this all happen in her own backyard.
Just like we're watching the markets, as always, here at Bloomberg. So let's get a check on those now with Amy Morris here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee. OpenAI has launched ChatGPT Search, positioning that company to better compete with search engines like Google, Microsoft's Bing, and Perplexity. It lets users search for timely information, like you might do it on the web anyway, and then get responses with inline attribution to news publishers and other data sources. Alphabet's autonomous driving unit, Waymo, was valued at more than $45 billion. That includes its latest round of financing that was led by Alphabet. The company, which competes with Uber in ride-hailing, has been rapidly expanding the number of rides it offers in cities including San Francisco and Phoenix. Stocks wiped out their October advance, with Microsoft and Meta Platforms weighing heavily on Wall Street trading after some disappointing outlooks. We do check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is down 81 points, NASDAQ down 427 points, and the Dow is down 212 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.27% and the 2-year yield at 4.16%. Microsoft shares, by the way, now more than 5% lower, and Meta shares now down nearly 4%. Peloton has named a new CEO, Peter Stern, currently president of Ford Integrated Services, previously vice president for Apple. He'll start at Peloton January 1st. After a 3-year slump, Peloton shares now are surging, now 29% higher. And Estee Lauder pulled its guidance for the year, citing uncertainty over a new chief executive and weak demand in China. Shares of Estee Lauder now 20% lower. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back now to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Watching the markets as we watch the final stretch here on the campaign trail with just 5 days to go until Election Day, though, as we've been reminding you here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, millions of Americans have already cast their ballots. The ones who haven't are probably the ones who are still deciding between these two candidates for sure, or perhaps deciding whether or not they want to go vote for either of them at all. And that's why they are continuing on the trail today in some of these battleground states that could decide the election. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris will be in Nevada today after Trump first appears in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Then it's on to Las Vegas for Kamala Harris, once again leaning on the power of celebrity with Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo, on the stage tonight.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting and quite the routine for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump has his own celebrities, slightly different brand, beginning with Elon Musk, of course.
Yep.
And we're going to be following both of them on the trail here. As Kaylee mentioned earlier, Donald Trump is in New Mexico, presumably to appeal to Latino voters, knowing that that is not a swing state, of course. But with us at the outset here is Mike Dorning, Bloomberg Politics editor, who's going to be looming large on election night, and maybe, Mike, in the days after. Thanks for joining us. What do you make of not only the travel plans here that we're seeing, pretty obvious, spending time living in the swing states between now and Tuesday, but also this whole narrative over the garbage flap? More people are talking about Donald Trump in a garbage truck than Kamala Harris's closing argument.
Yeah, and that's exactly the problem for Kamala Harris. I don't think that this garbage truck and the garbage gaffe by Biden is going to be that damaging to her. She's sort of responded well, and it's not something coming out of her or anything, but what it's really done is it's stomped on her closing argument. They've had to spend a day or so doing that instead of amplifying that closing argument. Now, these rallies will be amplifying the closing argument in swing states, but just like President Trump's campaign lost a couple of days on their problem with the comments about Puerto Ricans, Kamala Harris probably lost 24 hours here, and these are valuable days.
Well, the comments around Puerto Ricans are one thing, but we also got fresh material last night when he was in Wisconsin. Harris was as well. At one point, Donald Trump talked about protecting women whether they want it or not. I believe is the phrasing, whether they like it or not.
That's right.
You get the idea here, though, Mike, and that doesn't seem to be getting as much attention still as the garbage.
I have a feeling that the Kamala Harris campaign will try to call attention to that. She already talked about it today, but they'll be amplifying that Trump mistake. And that does go into an inherent problem of his, which is, a lot of women voters feel like he's curtailing their rights to their body and their autonomy. And that has been one of the most powerful drivers of turnout for Democrats over the last couple of years. And that may well be either the decisive or one of the most decisive dynamics in this election.
You tend to think that women impacted by these policies have made up their minds by now. Is there a group of undecided female voters who could be swayed by this?
I personally don't think this final week is much about undecided voters in any way, shape, or form. I mean, maybe a tiny bit. What it's about is getting your voters to turn out. And what this sort of controversy over reproductive rights does is it motivates women to turn out more in the polls, and other people are concerned about reproductive rights. So if you have something like this that can kind of amp up that fury, it does help on the drive out the turnout. Likewise, for a lot of the Trump campaign, it's about grievances, feeling like economic elites, cultural elites are taking the country in a different direction than working class voters want. So you could use that kind of disdain to amplify that grievance.
Well, on the subject of grievances, we know Donald Trump still has some grievances with the 2020 election, which he still does not admit that he lost, which he did. We're already seeing language from Trump and some of his allies around cheating. In Pennsylvania, for example, is where a lot of this seems to be centered. We're front-running this thing, the Trump campaign is, Mike.
Yes, they front-ran it last time in 2020, and it looks like they're front-running it again this time. It's not that unusual for a campaign to express confidence that they're going to do well, but Trump and the Trump campaign is kind of really talking like it's a done deal, that they've already won this thing and that the only thing that could stop them is cheating, and then they're claiming everything is an indication of this. So it does seem like they're front-running a case not to recognize the outcome. But again, that also can help their turnout, because Trump was saying we have to win this by a lot, and that way you can kind of again drive fury, which is what seems to animate his supporters.
Yeah, looking for margin in a race that looks like the margins are going to be incredibly tight if the polls are to be believed.
The polls, there's no good evidence, no good real evidence that the election is going one way or the other. It is absolutely tied based on the evidence that we see, but we can't tell the turnout stuff. So the turnout could really drive it in one direction or not. It might not be so tight on election night because of differential turnout.
All right. Bloomberg's Mike Dorning covering politics for us. Thank you so much,
Thanks, Mike.
as always. And as we consider the tightness of this race, it's pretty much true across the board when you look at national polls, but also when you look at the polls in the battleground states. Almost all of them at this time show a statistical tie.
In our poll, none tighter, as I remember, than Wisconsin.
That's right.
which was a 0.3 point race. So we'll call that a literal tie, I think, for these purposes. That's why they were both there yesterday.
Yeah, and that's why we add a valuable voice on Wisconsin to our program now. We're joined by Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore, who represents the Badger State here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for being with us. It's nice to hear from you again. Could you just give us your real read on how tight Wisconsin is at this time?
Oh, my God, it is so tight. But I am so encouraged by it is really, really tight. But I'm really encouraged by what I am seeing visually on the ground, particularly seeing that our 250-person staff here is really getting people out, young people. I'm delighted to see millennials and first-time voters out to vote, and that is very encouraging.
Take us to school on geography, Congresswoman. When we bear down in our coverage on Tuesday night, we're going to be focused on your state like a laser. Where should we be looking as the time zones bring Wisconsin poll closings into the picture?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of people always want to zero in on Milwaukee, where the largest aggregation of African Americans live. And Madison, of course, which is the capital of progressive politics in our state and in our country. But I want to point out to people that Milwaukee and Madison combined, that's only 1/3 of the voters in the entire state. And so that is why I think that the Harris-Walz campaign has gone everywhere. I would really, when I look at Waukesha County, a place that has been ruby red, we have found that every cycle, Democrats have made greater and greater inroads into that community. And as a matter of fact, the mayor of the city of Waukesha endorsed Kamala Harris. And so you better look everywhere. I, of course, represent Milwaukee and much of Milwaukee County. So I am laser focused on getting our vote out. And we've had, as of yesterday, we had over 71,000 people voted in the city of Milwaukee. And that's about 1/3 of what we expect. But we are, every single day, we're racking the numbers up.
Well, and that's just a reminder of how many minds, Congresswoman, have already been made up. There may be very few left to change here. I do wonder, though, if you think some minds may have been changed by the comments Donald Trump made in Wisconsin at his rally in Green Bay last night. The suggestion that he will protect women.
Audio.
Congresswoman, can you hear me?
I have lost.
Congresswoman? All right, we'll get back work on that with Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin. What I was going to say, Joe, is call attention to the remarks made in Green Bay last night. Brett Favre was there with Donald Trump when he talked about protecting women. This is something we have been hearing more and more from Donald Trump, as he does seem to be trying to reach that group of voters that he is not polling as well with as Harris is. He's polling better with men, of course. He said, I will protect women whether they like it or not. And Congresswoman, if you can hear me now, this language from Trump, whether they like it or not, is that going to change the minds of undecided voters in Wisconsin?
Listen, he's trying you know what, it's really pathetic. Whether we like it or not, we are going to vote him out. I think that we are going to see a gender gap that is widening because of his reckless comments and because he's just incredibly unbelievable. It seems to me that, his position on, the father of IVF, he is incredible. He is unbelievable. And we are going to continue to amplify those kind of comments to voters because we are going for every single vote. Donald Trump, of course, is coming to Milwaukee tomorrow, but so is Kamala Harris. And she's bringing the Isley brothers with her, MC Light, Glorilla, Cardi B. And so we are really appealing to everyone. Now, in terms of people who are undecided, I don't believe that there are people who are undecided. I think there are people who love to vote on election day. I used to be that person until COVID, that just wanted to wait until election day to vote. And those people who have not voted, we are tracking them. We know where people are eligible to vote and are not voting, and we're continuing to call and to knock on doors. We have droves of volunteers that knock on a regular basis and call on a regular basis. We're doing this thing until 1 minute to 8 on Tuesday night.
Well, it seems that somebody's listening on the call when it comes to early voting, Congresswoman. I'm looking at fresh numbers here from Wisconsin that jump off the page. We've seen some first-day records in some important states, but no one expected early voting to top, as you just pointed out, what we experienced in COVID. Enter Wisconsin. With 5 days out, you have already beat the number of in-person absentee ballots cast in 2020. As of this morning, right. 705, 326 voters have cast ballots in person. You're going to have an all-time high. What does this suggest to you about the final result?
Well, because people in Wisconsin understand our important role in standing up our democracy. We understand as women the importance of protecting our civil rights. We understand, even as men, targeting men, we understand the importance of protecting workers' rights in terms of protecting Social Security, in terms of protecting pensions, in terms of protecting all of the things that we believe that with Project 2025, that the president will roll back. Reasons that people like Elon Musk, for example, are so involved in the campaign, wanting to destroy payments, for example, salaries for overtime work. And men and women know that there is much at risk.
You'll get your state back maybe in a week, Congresswoman. Good luck with the ads and the speeches, and thank you for being with us. Gwen Moore from the 4th District of Wisconsin. The Congresswoman, of course, has a good chunk of Milwaukee in her district, where we actually had the RNC just a couple of months ago, in what was a very different race then, Kaylee.
Yeah, Joe Biden was still
Imagine that.
running back at the RNC.
Hard to remember, actually.
Yeah, and the first attempt on Donald Trump's life had just happened.
With that weekend, yeah.
Pretty incredible few months we've seen on this trail, and pretty incredible to realize that this is all coming to an end in 5 days, or at least we hope in 5 days. It could be, 10, 15.
A couple weeks.
Could stretch out for a little bit longer, but the home stretch is my point.
And there does seem to be consensus. The more voices on this program, we don't know about any undecided voters. I think we're beyond that now. It's about getting people out, and that includes you. You'll help us get there next week with special coverage on election night. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. OpenAI is crafting a direct challenge to Google by adding a search function to ChatGPT. The option is called ChatGPT Search and will let chatbot users search for timely information, sort of like you would on the web anyway, and get responses with inline attribution to news publishers and other data sources. For paying customers, this will be available as early as today. S&P's monthly gain streak has been broken. It would have been the longest since 2021. Investors grappling with corporate results. We check the markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is down 80 points. NASDAQ down 418 points. The Dow is down 187 points. And the 10-year Treasury yield is at 4.26%. The 2-year yield at 4.15%. Alphabet's autonomous driving unit, Waymo, was valued at more than $45 billion, including its latest round of financing, which was led by Alphabet. The company will use now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lines in Washington alongside Joe Matthew as we count down with just 5 days to go until Election Day, and both candidates making their pitches to groups where they are trying to have more strength. For Kamala Harris today, as she crisscrosses Nevada and Arizona, in part that's a focus on Latino voters. The same could be said for Donald Trump, who is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But for Donald Trump as well, it's about courting more women, because Harris consistently has been polling ahead of him in that gender group while she lags him on men. He's been talking a lot about rallies about protecting women. And as we have mentioned a few times this hour, he talked about protecting women again last night in Wisconsin.
The women of our country. I want to protect the women. Sir, please don't say that. Why? They said we think it's very inappropriate for you to say, so why? I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
And that is not all Donald Trump said in the rally in Green Bay. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or YouTube, you see him wearing the reflector safety vest as he was trying to don the outfit of a garbage man, as he put it, following the flap over the use of the word garbage earlier in the week. This is getting to be extensive background here with several turns in this whole controversy. But Donald Trump also told supporters that they're on pace for a runaway victory, barring any fraud. And it brings us back to the preamble here, the pre-buttal, if you will, setting the stage potentially for what Donald Trump could call a rigged election. Having experienced this in 2020, shields are up, and our signature panel is with us. Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst, political science professor at Iona University, alongside Rick Davis, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, and partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie, what's your thought on this? Because people's minds go to the same place. He points to the poly market. He tells supporters that he's leading in the polls when they're, in fact, we've established over the course of this program already, they're dead even. But it helps to set up the narrative for post-election, according to some Democrats. How do you see it?
Yeah, and I think that's the big fear. I mean, we've just heard that Kamala Harris's team has gone and hired Mark Elias. He is a great attorney that helps Democrats in these kinds of challenges. Obviously, the GOP, the Republicans, and the Trump campaign have their own attorneys, because I think we have entered now what we all knew was coming, which is days before the race and in the days after, there's going to be a host of legal challenges. And I think we can see that, and this is nothing new. This sort of, election lawfare, if you will, has been coming since the 2000 campaign. We're 25 years after that, and now we are living in a democracy in which almost every election is being challenged in court. And so it's not the way you want to run an election, but it's where we find ourselves. And I can just tell you, I was talking to young people earlier today. Many of them are concerned about what's going to happen after the election. And they are concerned because, like all of us, they listen to this rhetoric and they hear that people are saying these things are going to be challenged, and they fear that somebody or some group may take this too far. So I think it could be a fraught few days after this election, and hopefully it doesn't last too long.
So it raises a couple questions for me, Rick. One being, does the electorate, the broad electorate, kind of see through this? Maybe not the most loyal Trump supporters who still believe that he won in 2020, that something was wrong when no court, no factual evidence supports that? Or does it even matter if the electorate sees through it, because it's ultimately going to be decided not by them, but potentially in the courts?
Well, ultimately, it's always the voters who decide who gets counted as a voter. You want to have confidence that all, qualified voters have their votes count on election day. The question is, when is that decision going to be made? I mean, over the last 2 years, there have already been 165 lawsuits that would dictate who those voters are, who's eligible, what the voter rolls look like, and we've heard an onslaught of those things recently. And obviously, post-election, there'll be even more by both parties over one, election irregularities, and two, a lot of activity around vote counting, including what is likely to happen, which is almost every one of these targeted states, these swing states, are within the margin of error, certainly within 1 percentage point. Most of them, the leads are only 1/10 of a point or 2/10 of a point. And those are likely to go to recounts. And each of these 7 states have different recount laws, and each of those have different times that govern how long it takes to recount them. And so we may be sitting through 7 recounts in addition to all the litigation.
Wow. What a thought. We talk so much about the weave. That's Donald Trump, that we do the weave. How about the blur, Jeannie? This lawsuit that was filed in Pennsylvania 2 days ago is important. Donald Trump's campaign suing the Board of Elections in Bucks County because they said people were denied access when they tried to drop off their mail-in ballots. To be clear, they don't do in-person early voting there, but you can drop off your mail-in ballot in person. It got to the point where a judge granted a preliminary injunction and extended the deadline for these ballots. But we have little stories like this cropping up around the country here. When you put them into the mosaic, the blur, people start to say, hey, this whole system is broken. Isn't that the idea?
It absolutely is. I like the idea of the blur. I don't like the idea, but it's a great descriptor, Joe. And that's precisely what Trump is trying to do. I mean, his argument all along has been, I am going to win. The only reason I won't win is because the other side has stolen this election. And so this is how he does it. He talks about Bucks County, where we know the Bucks County officials on the ground said that was them trying to stick with voting hours, and it was something that the judge rightly extended those days. That should give us sort of a sense of calmness and a sense of, that this system is working the way it should. But that's not how Donald Trump is presenting it. Also, his, talking constantly about Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 2,600 votes, he said, were stolen. Those weren't votes. Those were voter applications, right? He doesn't mention the fact that the GOP just won in the U.S. Supreme Court with the case of the governor of Virginia purging those 1,600 voters from the voter rolls. So there's a lot of litigation out there. He is absolutely trying to do what you call blur this thing. So if he does lose, and it makes you wonder if that's what they're seeing in their internal polls, that he then will come back and say this was stolen. And that is what makes what's happening today and what's happened with Donald Trump so different. We do have a right to challenge elections when we are a part of them. We do have that absolute capacity and legal ability and right. But it is the fact that he will not promise that when this thing is over, he will accept a loss, if that's what indeed occurs, that makes everybody so anxious about this thing.
In addition to all of the legal issues happening around the vote itself, there also was heard in court today arguments in the case surrounding Elon Musk's $1 million sweepstakes to a registered voter. It's now moving to federal court after a state judge heard arguments earlier today. This, of course, is $1 million a day sweepstakes, Rick, that is being led by America PAC, which Musk has funneled millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars into, and also has been charged with a lot of the ground game for Donald Trump. Do we have a sense of how, maybe not the sweepstakes, but how the actual get out the vote effort is going with the fact that it has been outsourced by the Trump campaign?
Yeah, I must admit, I have a particular interest in this. I love the ground game activity. I've been making a lot of calls to Arizona, North Carolina, Nevada, places that I still have some old friends who are in the political game operating. And to an individual, they indicate to me that the biggest disaster of the 2024 campaign is going to be the America PAC, its stewardship of the money that they've received, the conflicting, demands that Elon Musk is making them to do these turnout operations, the lack of coordination that they've had with political groups like the party on the ground in virtually every one of the swing states. So I would be shocked if there's any evidence that the turnout operation is going well in any one state. And I will not be shocked if Donald Trump loses, he blames it on Elon Musk.
Huh. What do you make of that, Jeannie? That's a lot of money to spend to be blamed for an electoral loss.
It is. And just to follow up on that, we heard about some people, some canvassers who said they were put in the back of a pickup truck. They didn't know who they were working for. They were threatened. I mean, it has gotten ugly on the ground. It is a hard thing to do, the ground game, as Rick knows better than anyone. And it takes time and it takes organization. Elon Musk has never exhibited any sense or ability to do this. And so I would say that I agree with the assessment that if this thing goes south for Trump, it's going to be based probably on the ground game.
Well, Elon Musk certainly is one of Trump's loudest surrogates. Jeannie, we just have about 90 seconds left. But if you look at Kamala Harris's prominent surrogates, we talked about Joe Biden's garbage gaffe already this week. There was President Barack Obama, former president, suggesting that black men who don't vote for Harris were doing it because of some kind of sexism or misogyny. Then today, what's making the rounds in conservative circles is Mark Cuban, another powerful surrogate for her, saying that Donald Trump is never around strong, intelligent women. Are the surrogates doing more damage to her than helping her at this point?
Yeah, I think absolutely. In the case of Joe Biden, you hear every Democrat saying, get him in the White House and keep him there and don't let him go before Zoom. And I do think Kamala Harris could have came out tougher on that and distanced herself. It's one of the dangers of working with surrogates. I'm not sure the Mark Cuban statement will have as much traction, but the Joe Biden one definitely didn't help the campaign.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel, joining us on this Thursday. Thank you so much, as always. And we still have much more ahead on Balance of Power as we talk about the campaign and the ground game, the messaging they are putting out to try to turn voters out in these final days here. A lot of that messaging does also surround policy, for all of the attention paid to some of these more provocative one-liners, if you will. They're still trying to sell their economic policy in particular, and we're going to take a closer look at that and where the economy is.
Yep, absolutely.
Heading into Election Day.
Because this is it. We spent months asking, where will the economy be when people vote? Here we are, and Douglas Holtz-Eakin will join us coming up next on the fastest show in politics. Thanks again to our signature panel. And a lot more to follow here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. Have we mentioned there are 5 days to go? Oh, and happy Halloween. Thanks for being part of the show today. Only on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. The Federal Reserve's preferred measure of underlying U.S. inflation posted its biggest monthly gain since April, bolstering the case for a slower pace of interest rate cuts after last month's outsized reduction. We check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. It's red across the screen. S&P 500 down 89 points. NASDAQ down 461 points, and the Dow is down 233 points. The Russell 2000 index is down 18 points. 10-year Treasury yield is down 1%, now at 4.26%, and the 2-year yield is at 4.15%. Ford's electric pickup truck, the F-150 Lightning, saw sales pick up this year, but it wasn't enough. Now Ford plans to shut down the plant that produces the electric vehicle through the end of this year. Ford is set to begin a 7-week shutdown of that plant in mid-November. Shares of Ford have now fallen 1.5%. And a judge in Philadelphia held a brief hearing this morning in a bid to shut down Elon Musk's $1 million a day sweepstakes in battleground states. The judge put the state case on hold while Musk tries to have it moved to federal court. Now join a special edition of Bloomberg Technology live at 6 o'clock tonight on Bloomberg Radio and TV for a conversation with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger. That's 6 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg Radio, on Bloomberg Television, and on YouTube. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
Amy Morris, thank you so much. With her eyes on the markets and our eyes not only on the presidential campaign, but the economy. This is a big data week. And it matters because, well, presumably some people are still making up their mind on who they want to vote for. Maybe some people could have their minds changed. There's also a little Fed meeting. I hate to remind you here, it's right after the election next week, which makes us wonder as well, Kaylee Lines, about potential volatility in this market if we don't get an early call.
Well, yeah, there could be major uncertainty around not just who wins the presidency, but who's going to control Congress. And then potentially you add monetary policy uncertainty to all that potential fiscal policy uncertainty. It could be a pretty nasty cocktail, and a reminder that we're all in for it next week. So thank you, Joe. Happy Halloween, everyone. It's spooky out here. As we consider, though, the economic data we got today that could inform that Fed decision next week and inform voters' thoughts on the economy as they head to the ballot box, it's arguably trending in the right direction. PCE, 2.1%. Almost right there exactly at the Federal Reserve's target.
Pretty good reading, although a bit below forecast. 2.8% growth on GDP this week. We get jobs data tomorrow. Expected to have the lowest pre-election unemployment rate, Kaylee, in 24 years.
So we want to get a picture of all of this and consider the economic policies being put forward still on the campaign trail, because we've gotten some new ones just in the last week or so. Douglas Holt-Deakin is with us now. He is president at American Action Forum. Welcome back to Balance of Power. Sir, always great to have you. Can you just diagnose where the economy really is right now as Election Day is basically upon us?
Well, I think the starting point is the third quarter GDP numbers, which were quite good. Year over year, 2.7% growth, 2.8% in the third quarter at an annual rate, bolstered by strong household spending and strong government spending. The only, Achilles heel in that report is light on business fixed investment, something I always keep an eye on. But on the whole, a very strong report. And you complement that with a big jump in consumer confidence early in October that suggests that the households are going to continue to be spending their money. You get a jobs report from ADP at 230,000 jobs, another big number in the labor market. And then you get the PCE report, and that's the only thing that makes me, have a little pause, which is core PCE year over year at 2.7 has been stuck there for 4 months. And so if you look at inflation expectations, a year out there, 2.5 to 3, inflation's at 2.5. We've sort of settled into a 2.5% rut. And the question is, will we see continued progress toward 2%, or will the Fed essentially go on hold? But I think the right way to think about it, if you listen to the spooky list that you went through there at the lead into this segment, the economy is not the spooky thing. It's the policy risk that's surrounded. If you're trying to figure out where you're going, it's all about what will the Fed do, and in particular, what will the candidates do, who will win, and how will the Fed have to react to, for example, a 10% across-the-board tariff? That's hard to game that out.
Does that mean we've got a quarter point in the bag for next week? Douglas, I ask you that because Joe Biden put out a statement on the PCE data. He says inflation has now fallen to 2.1%, nearly at its 2% target, but we have more to do.
Well, I think that, many presidents try to box the Fed in. Good luck with that. They're going to do their job. I was among those who was surprised to see them go 50 basis points and thought that when they did that, they really gave themselves the option to go more slowly later. The day after the election, when it may not even really be settled, and we've seen these recent strong data, it might be a good day to stay on hold. We'll see.
Okay, so that's the monetary policy side of this equation. To get back to the fiscal side, though, which could obviously be dramatically impacted depending on who wins these many races on Tuesday, Douglas, we've heard from Elon Musk and Donald Trump reiterating what Elon Musk said in the last week, that he, if he is appointed the head of this government efficiency commission or whatever you want to call it, could cut $2 trillion in government spending. Is that really possible?
I will be 6'4" and have a full head of hair before that happens. There's just no way. This is a nice talking point, but who is going to give him that authority? The president doesn't have the authority to give a private citizen an axe and say, go after the federal agencies. The Congress of the United States would have to pass a law that produced a commission that he could lead that had those authorities. And that is never going to happen. They created the programs that he's talking about cutting out. They put in place the personnel that he's talking about axing out. No, this is campaign talk that should be interpreted as no more than campaign talk.
Well, considering your former life at CBO, we thought maybe you could score this idea, because Elon Musk told people in the crowd yesterday, if you're laughing, that's not a good sign, because Elon Musk says we're going to be in for some pain. Douglas, what's it going to feel like?
So if suppose you just did the exercise where you had a commission that could recommend things, they would have to recommend the near elimination of half the government in order to reach that $2 trillion target. They've taken off limits, Social Security, Medicare. Remember, the candidate Trump has said he's not touching those. Those are, by themselves, over half of non-interest spending over the next 10 years. So you got to take on the other half of the government and decimate it. I think some Republicans are going to want to hold on to the Defense Department. I'm just guessing. And, it seems unlikely that you could get anything through Congress to enact this commission's proposals. So, I'm now officially old. I remember the Grace Commission. I remember the great claims that were going to be made about how it changed the trajectory of the federal bureaucracy forever. And as I sit here in 2024, it doesn't look like it did much, and this won't either.
Well, if we're just still gaming out like the hypothetical math here, even if you were to do all of that, could you pay for the tax cuts Donald Trump has put forward, the very long list of the tax either cuts or breaks, even if you were to do all of that, get rid of the Defense Department or what have you?
Look, there is so little specificity, and there's one that happens every day. I don't know what he's proposed today. I'm not sure we're going to have a tax base by Tuesday. He has given away the store on a daily basis. So, it's nothing like a sound tax policy platform. He wants to simultaneously extend the 27 Act or the 17 Act and do a bunch of other things. They're going to have to step back and restart. And I guess, I understand campaigns. I've been on a campaign. I understand the politics of trying to collect votes as you go to the finish line. But it's important to recognize that he wants to get a deal on 17. That would be his signature accomplishment. Did it in his first term, renewed it in his second term. Every time he makes a proposal, let's not tax overtime, let's not tax, let's get rid of the SALT cap, he creates a constituency that makes it harder to extend that, makes it harder to renew it.
Yep.
And so he is working at odds with what he needs next year.
It is true. The appropriations folks that we talk to are getting some anxiety every time Donald Trump announces another exemption at the podium here. Kamala Harris has had her share of them as well, Douglas. And as a creature of Washington, you know what the conventional wisdom is. The House, they say, will turn Democratic. The Senate will turn Republican. In that world, neither of them likely get any of their proposals passed, right?
I think the new proposals, so, the Harris proposals on taxing capital gains and the like, they're non-starters in that world. I think the Trump proposals are the same way. My concern is they will revert to form and just buy each other off, and we'll do the extended spending that the Democrats want. We'll extend all the tax cuts without paying for them, and will be in a fiscal mess. And so that's really worth looking out for.
My God. Well, you know, that is
I'm
a
the cheery guy to
distinct
have
reality.
on Halloween, right?
Well,
yeah, this has been fun.
You want to one up us on spooky?
Honestly,
I think you won, Douglas.
No, but honestly, one of the things to watch for is when really pressed for time, and it's going to be tight next year. They got a lot going on, and not knowing really what to do, they revert to form and do what they did before, and they have done that before, so they can easily kick the whole decision out 2 years and try again.
Path of least resistance. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, great to see you. As always, thanks for joining us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. We always have good conversations with Douglas because he can speak freely now that he's not running the CBO.
Indeed, we always appreciate his time as we consider the actual economic implications of some of these policies put forward in just this election as a whole, keeping in mind it's not just the domestic economy that needs to be considered here, but also the way in which it's viewed internationally and how we consider the U.S. as an investment destination and, of course, the U.S. dollar as a global reserve currency.
Well, this is why uncertainty matters at a time like this, and we'll be looking closely at the markets as we get our way through the election week next week. Saleha Mohsen is with us right now, host of the Big Take DC podcast, because, you know, Saleha is talking to somebody we know pretty well around here, speaking about politics crossing over with finance. Pat Toomey, the former Pennsylvania senator who was with us not that long ago, sitting down with Saleha to talk about the stakes here in arguably the most important swing state on the map. She's with us now. Good to see you. Podcast drops today. What's on his mind as we approach not only the election, but the Fed meeting?
Yeah, we have got a Fed meeting coming up next week, too. Coming up with elections, he's worried about what the implications of the U.S. not having it as a given, that we will have a smooth transfer of power. And he connects that to what that means for our economic security and our dollar dominance, which buys us a lot for consumers, right? It's the reason that we can have low credit card interest rates, low mortgage rates, because everyone has an insatiable appetite for our dollars. And that appetite is predicated on institutions held up by rule of law, free and fair elections, and the fact that you can't have a dictatorship in this country.
Well, Donald Trump was actually asked about this in his interview with Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, about this notion that his policies could lead to the loss of the dollar as a reserve currency. Donald Trump said, A, that won't happen, but also that's the quickest way to turn yourself into a third world country. What exactly would happen if the dollar were to lose that status?
We don't actually know a lot. You know, we've seen other countries historically lose their preeminent status. You know, the sterling from the UK was the world's reserve asset up until World War II, and before that, the Dutch florin. We've seen countries basically, you know, the bottom line is that the U.S. would not be able to have the massive debt that we have now. So all of a sudden, the interest on all the debt that we have now would be higher, and that means interest costs on everything else would also elevate.
This is an important Senate race in Pennsylvania that we can factor in because it's so closely tied to the presidential race. And I just wonder what your thoughts are as you cover this. A state that's too close to call at the top of the ticket means what for Bob Casey versus David McCormick?
I mean, for one thing, there's a lot of stories about how this race or this state or this demographic is going to be who calls the presidential race. But Pennsylvania, like you're saying, is important. You have Bob Casey, the Democrat, who is up against David McCormick, a Republican. It's an interesting situation because David McCormick is not from the area, but he has garnered quite a bit of support, and it's a pretty intense race.
There's a lot of really intense races across the country. Pennsylvania, just one of them. We're in for an intense period here, and certainly the world is watching. Just in our final minute, Saleha, while we talk about the potential implications for the dollar of this election in particular, aren't we already in a world in which many countries are trying to move away from the U.S. dollar? I'm thinking specifically of China here.
Yeah, there is a China-led coalition, Kaylee, that is trying to move away from the dollar. But the dollar's reign right now is at such a pinnacle that right now it's 88% of all FX transactions happen in the dollar. China is around 10%.
Wow.
That's how big a gap anyone would have to overcome.
All right, it's a fascinating subject, and it is what you can find in the Big Take podcast, Big Take DC podcast this week, hosted by Saleha Mohsen, Bloomberg Washington correspondent. Thank you, as always, for joining us here on Balance of Power. And of course, Joe, we still have much more coming up later today as we can continue to track the tracks being made on the campaign trail by these candidates who are focused on the Sun Belt and Latino voters today.
Yeah, curious to find Donald Trump in New Mexico. He's also in Nevada, though, where Kamala Harris will be later on today. It's interesting to watch this Sun Belt lane that we talked so much about when she reached the top of the ticket be discounted a bit. The Democrats are really looking back at the greatest hits, which is that blue wall.
Which includes Pennsylvania, the state that we were just discussing. With 19 electoral votes, it really could be where this election is won or lost, and we'll continue to cover it for you today. And of course, next week, we'll have special election coverage here on Bloomberg TV and radio and on YouTube beginning at 5 p.m. on election night. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone, live on TV, radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenivek. Carol Masser is off today. She is back Monday. Here in her place is Emily Griffeo of Bloomberg News. She's cross-asset team reporter. Emily, a little bit of a spooky trade on this Halloween if you're long this market.
Yes, but finally some action because we had gone 29 days without a 1% move.
in the S&P 500, and now we're down 1.6%, Tim.
Okay, Microsoft certainly helping to bring stocks down today. Also, Meta Platforms. We're going to hear from Apple a little bit later, and of course, we're going to hear from Amazon a little bit later as well. Before we get to that, though, the economic data, Emily, continues to come in.
Yeah, the economic data continues to roll in ahead of Election Day, Tim. Today, a read on inflation and the labor market ahead of tomorrow's payrolls data. There's a lot going on. Our economics editor is coming up with what you need to know. And on the election, Donald Trump and his allies are setting the stage for outrage and legal challenges if the election doesn't break in favor of Republicans.
Okay, we also, how's this? Hey, Alexa, are you as smart as ChatGPT? Okay, still waiting, still waiting. The answer, not yet. It's today's big take. It's the inside story of the new Alexa, which, yes, is still stuck in a lab. All that and more coming up over the next hour right here on Bloomberg Business Week. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Amy Morris in for Charlie Pellet. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim, and as you just mentioned, OpenAI has launched ChatGPT Search, positioning the company to better compete with search engines like Google and Bing and Perplexity. It lets users search for timely information, just like you would on the web, and get responses with inline attribution to news publishers and other data sources. Stocks wiped out their October advance. Microsoft and Meta Platforms weighing heavily on Wall Street trading after disappointing outlooks. Microsoft shares right now 5.7% lower. Meta shares have fallen 4.5%. That's dragging markets lower. We check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 now down 95 points. NASDAQ down 483 points. And the Dow is down 285 points. The 10-year Treasury at 4.27% and the 2-year yield at 4.15%. Peloton has named a new CEO, Peter Stern, currently president of Ford Integrated Services and previously served as a vice president for Apple. Stern will start at Peloton January 1st. And after a slump that lasted 3 years, Peloton shares are higher. In fact, they're surging, now 26% higher. And raw sugar futures rallied in New York on concerns that a slowdown in production next month and a delayed start to next year's harvest in top shipper Brazil will keep global supplies tight in the short term. Recent rainfall is beneficial to next year's crop, but ADM investor analysts say it could still slow production for the remainder of this year. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Tim Stenavec and Emily Grafeo.
Amy, thanks for that update. We do appreciate it. Well, like we were saying, economic data continues to come in just days ahead of Election Day. Today, no exception. The Fed's preferred measure of underlying U.S. inflation posting its biggest monthly gain going back to April. It bolsters the case for a slower pace of rate cuts following last month's outsized reduction. Core PCE, it strips out food and energy items. It increased 0.3% in September. That was in line with estimates, and 2.7% from a year earlier. Overall inflation was 2.1%, the lowest going all the way back to early 2021. And it's just above that 2% goal that the Fed has. Molly Smith is Bloomberg News economics editor. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. Holistically, taken all together, pretty good print when it comes to the data that we got today.
Yeah, I think it confirms a lot of what we've already known to be true, that the path to disinflation is going to be a bit bumpy, and that's what you saw from the monthly print today. But when you look at the annual figures, you still see them trending downward. And as you noted, that overall PCE print coming in at 2.1%. There were some economists who had predicted it would have hit 2% today. So we're really like right there in line with where the Fed wants to be.
What are some areas that aren't coming down?
You know, services has been really the difficult spot of inflation.
Sticky.
That, yeah, I mean, it's, I mean, we did see a bit on the good side too, but it really has been more so services, and that's where the bulk of spending happens in our economy as well. Housing, of course, is always going to be the big driver there, but yeah, I mean, it's. But the thing is that you hear Americans obviously are very distressed by high inflation and high prices, and you would think that at some point that's got to be weighing on spending, but it hasn't happened yet. You know, we've been calling for consumer spending to slow down for a while, but as long as you still see wages and salaries growing like they did in September, it's hard to see how that spending is just going to collapse.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about kind of consumer sentiment, especially ahead of the election. It does feel like a really big issue is inflation. Do the numbers that we got today, how does that kind of match up with what your reporting is showing you about how people really feel about this economy?
I think, you know, the way that the regular people think about the economy and the way that we report it here are two very different things. If you ask anyone what they think about the economy, I think views are largely pretty negative, and they will just say that everything's more expensive compared to how it used to be, that it's really hard to find a job if you're out of one right now. But then you look at the macro data, and yes, like inflation is easing, and of course we understand though that inflation's a rate of change. It's not talking about absolute prices. So yes, prices are rising more slowly, but they are still rising. So both can be true at the same time. And unemployment is still really low. A lot of job indicators are still pretty solid. Granted, not nearly as, crazy robust as they were in 21 and 22, but that's also was a really unsustainable labor market, and we're at one now that's more normal.
Well, we'll find out details tomorrow how normal it is, because last month came in much hotter than expected at 254,000 jobs added.
Big number.
It was a big number. The estimate for tomorrow is 105,000. Is there a whisper number out there that's different that you know
honestly, I don't, but I will tell you that the estimates on this are crazy.
They're all over the place?
We've got Bloomberg Economics here is calling for a decline of 10,000 payrolls.
Okay.
That'd be the first drop since 2020. And then on the high end, you've got a gain of 180,000. So that spread right there is already like the biggest in estimates in about a year.
And obviously everybody's taking into account the same information, but some analysts are really concerned about temporary displacement due to natural disasters, no?
Yeah, that's where the payrolls number is going to be really hard to look through tomorrow, and I'm hoping that we get some good clarity from the BLS and not just saying there was, quote, no discernible effect from either Hurricanes Helene and Milton. I always conflate the two letters there. But yeah, those ones were, right around when the BLS tabulates the jobs report. So it's going to be important to look at both surveys tomorrow, because the one that comprises the payroll survey, if you didn't work any time at all in that week, maybe because of weather, for whatever reason, maybe you were on strike, that survey would say you were not employed. You effectively did not have a job. But the household survey would still count that person as employed. So that's a really big difference there. And the household survey will also count people who weren't at work due to bad weather. So that's where we're kind of leaning a little bit more on this survey for tomorrow, even though it is the more volatile of the two.
What does this mean for the Fed, Molly?
Oh, wouldn't we all love to know? I mean, I think that, when you have a report like this that could be with as many caveats as we might be thinking, that I would think that, the Fed is just going to take what their understanding of the labor market already is going into, the meeting next week. And we have, right now, it seems to be a job market that is still strong by many measures, but of course has cooled in recent months. And I think it's one that they still would say is not a source of inflationary pressure, that wage growth has cooled and that job openings have come down substantially, but it also doesn't look like we're at risk of unemployment severely rising.
Is it just me, or are other people putting more weight on these numbers as we get closer and closer to Election Day, given that so many surveys show that the economy is the most important issue for voters?
I mean, I think the way voters think about the economy, again, it's different than what we're talking about in the data. I don't think that the jobs report tomorrow is going to decide how somebody votes. And granted, a lot of people already have voted. So I think what they're more thinking about is like their own personal finances, their own, right now, do they have a job? Can they pay their bills? And does the jobs report tomorrow change that for something that happened in October? I'm not sure.
I mean, I think if we get a negative print tomorrow, then the Trump campaign
they will jump all over it.
Jump all over that.
Of course, if the unemployment rate goes up, sure. I mean, I know sometimes I think about this more practically as someone who's just a quasi-economist rather than what actually transcends over into mainstream media and what voters are thinking about. So yeah, I mean, for sure it's going to be a talking point from either campaign, either way.
All right, Molly Smith, Bloomberg News economics editor here in our Bloomberg Business Week studio. That's a view of the data, some of the final data before Election Day on Tuesday, which, yes, is right around the corner. And ahead of that, Donald Trump and his allies are telling supporters that they are on pace for a runaway victory, barring fraud, setting the stage for outrage and legal challenges if the election doesn't break in favor of Republicans. Mario Parker is Bloomberg News managing editor for U.S. economy and government. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Mario, Josh out with a story that says the Trump team is conflating a little bit of data. They're conflating polls, early data, to create this narrative that they're just way ahead. What's going on here?
No, you're saying it. You're saying a continuation in some ways of the argument that Donald Trump put forth in 2020 that the polls are always wrong unless he's winning, or that the outcome is always wrong unless he's winning as well. So his campaign has for weeks now been trying to create the illusion that he's the front runner. He's campaigning in New Mexico, which isn't a key swing state. He's set to campaign in Virginia, for example, which isn't a key swing state. Again, this comes off the heels of him campaigning in New York over the weekend. The thought there, the psychology behind that, is to give the illusion that he doesn't even have to be necessarily bothered with just campaigning or constrained to the swing states. He can go on offense in those other states. Therefore, that should mean to voters that, oh, he must have a comfortable lead in places like Pennsylvania.
And what is the kind of intent here from the campaign? Is the idea that if he doesn't win, there'll be more people that, I guess, believe that there's perhaps the election wasn't exactly fair?
Yeah, it lays the groundwork for him to make this argument. His campaign surrogates have, for the better part of the last week, also been touting many of the lawsuits that they filed across the country right now. Again, in states that they aren't even competitive, or and they know that they're not competitive in. But the thought is to essentially lay the groundwork for if he somehow loses a state like Pennsylvania, which is starting to come into focus as the crown jewel of the battleground states come Tuesday, that it sets up the argument for him to say that we need a recount, that we need to challenge this, to file litigation, to have supporters kind of enraged about it as well, in order to bolster his argument and his movement.
Help me out here, Mario, because I see a difference in the position that he's in right now in 2024 versus 2020, because he's not in the White House right now. What power does he actually have not to concede or not to acknowledge an outcome of the vote, given that he is not commander-in-chief and he doesn't need to vacate anything on January 20th?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tim. I mean, the other part is he's not bound to have to concede either, right? Polls show this is gonna be a razor-thin election. Every poll that we've seen so far has it within a margin of error. So, I mean, in some places, again, he puts forth this argument, demands a recount, demands some type of, makes enough noise, puts forth a credible enough argument that it gets to the Supreme Court, which is often ruled in his favor.
So how is, I guess, the Trump campaign's strategy different than, I'm thinking of Harris's campaign or other political leaders in the past who have campaigned with this optimistic idea that, oh, we're going to win, as a tactic to just rally their supporters?
Yeah, I think there's a difference there. The distinction is, Kamala Harris is in fact one of those candidates that we've seen in the traditional mold who is espousing confidence on the campaign trail. The difference is, and the distinction is, with Trump's argument is that he's not only saying that if he does. He feels confident that he's going to win, but he is quite clear making a caveat as well that if we don't win, it's because some malfeasance occurred. He's saying as much on the campaign trail.
Do we expect, Mario, if the election doesn't go his way, lawmakers who support Trump right now will continue to get behind him and support him in his fight? The concern, of course, is what happened on January 6, 2021. Now with Speaker Johnson as Speaker of the House, what happens then?
Well, there's a couple of things at play, right? Democrats, the Harris campaign, for its part, has hired some pretty historically aggressive attorneys. Think Mark Elias, for example. So they're prepared for this. You're seeing on social media right now, DNC Chair Jamie Harrison saying things like, call a certain number if you feel that your vote is in jeopardy, et cetera. So that's what's taking place on that side of the ledger. Now, on the other side of the ledger, that's $1 million question. I mean, as of right now, there's been no evidence that Donald Trump does not still maintain an iron grip on the Republican Party. Look no further than Elon Musk and others, some of his biggest supporters, who are already espousing or who have espoused some of his election denialism and are bolstering this argument that we're talking about here.
You mentioned two things that is the perfect segue. You said Elon Musk and $1 million. So I want to talk about the recent ruling or the temporary staving off that is a success for Elon Musk, a win for him. A judge in Pennsylvania paused a hearing on a lawsuit against Elon Musk's daily $1 million giveaway to voters. It allows Musk to try to move the case to federal court. What's the latest here? Can he continue to do this ahead of the election?
As of right now, he's unrestrained, right? This would have been the kind of the juncture where it would have slowed or barred him from continuing this practice. We'll see whether or not he does get his wish to get the case moved to a federal court. The thinking, again, being that maybe he has a chance of having a more favorable Republican-leaning judge that will continue to allow him to do so. But, I mean, the grounds, to go back to the basis of what's happening here, is the fact that, and I see the video, is that the richest man in the world is doing kind of like a sweepstakes, if you will, clearinghouse sweepstakes for the election, the big checks, et cetera. While it doesn't require you to state who you're going to support, the Democrats will argue that it's inferred.
And Mario, we don't have a ton of time left, but Trump has said that his campaign is leading in all the polls. And I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of the data and how it's showing just how close this race actually is now, just a few days ahead of the election.
Yeah, well, what we're seeing across the board is just a razor-thin coin toss election. Some polls have Trump up by a point or a percentage even. Some other polls within those same states have Harris with similar leads. Right now, it's just deadlocked across the board. I've never seen anything like it, and the sources I speak with, whether Democrat or Republican, also say the same thing.
Mario, just 30 seconds. The Harris campaign, though, still confident that the election will be decided and could even be decided on Election Day.
Yeah, they're hopeful. They're looking at some of the early data, again, extrapolating what we have seen in the polls about maybe a historic gender gap and the fact that they see just high turnout among women voters. They're thinking that bodes well for her.
All right, Mario Parker, Bloomberg News managing editor for U.S. Economy and Government, joining us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Check out all the latest campaign coverage at Bloomberg.com and, of course, on the Bloomberg terminal. Taking a look at stocks, the NASDAQ Composite down 2.6%, the S&P 500 down 1.6%, the Dow down 0.6%. We get Apple after the bell. We get Amazon and more after the bell. Before that, though, we check in with our Seattle reporter on Amazon and the latest with Alexa.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
my general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Chat GPT. The answer, much to the chagrin of Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon, is not yet. And that's the focus of today's Big Take. It's one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg terminal. Check it out at Bloomberg Big Take on the terminal and at Bloomberg.com/Big Take. As Austin Carr and Matt Day write, Alexa remains little more than a glorified kitchen timer for many people. But if Amazon can capitalize on that reach and convince even a fraction of its customers to pay for a souped-up Alexa GPT, the unit could finally turn a profit and secure its future at a frugal company. Matt Day is Bloomberg News technology reporter. He joins us from Seattle. Matt, an incredible investigation, as I mentioned, today's Big Take, into the lab where they're developing the next generation of Alexa, where things have not quite gone according to plan. We were supposed to see this thing a few weeks ago. What happened?
Yeah, so Amazon about a year and a month ago showed off, an Alexa plus ChatGPT, you might call it, just infusing the software with generative artificial intelligence, making it chattier, making it able to carry on conversations more than just a couple of turns. We were supposed to see that, certainly sometime this year, but engineers were hopeful it would be early in the year. At one point, there was a scheduled event for New York in October to unveil this thing. That got scrapped. Alexa's still stuck in the lab. They're having some trouble, getting it to, converse fluently, but then also, not hallucinate or all the other sort of factual flubs that we all know that generative AI tools can do.
When I think of Alexa, I think of AI. I think of Alexa being one of the first examples of a consumer product where people were interacting with something that was very AI-like. But what is the current version of Alexa missing that Amazon wants to integrate into it so badly?
So it's kind of remarkable if you roll back the clock, to when they were that first example of something that felt like AI to a lot of people, right? They just owned the universe, 2015, 2016, 2017. So what they're hoping to get out of generative AI is it's that promise for, a companion, right? We read news stories all the time about people using generative AI services for, mental health counseling or entertainment, just kind of talking back and forth. answering complicated questions, remembering context. Those are all things that Alexa has struggled with, right? Like to a large extent, the device is kind of a yes or no machine or a fact retrieval system. It's kind of tough to layer on all that magic of generative artificial intelligence with a system that can still give you, one correct answer pretty reliably.
What's the promise here for Amazon as a company, Matt? If they can figure out a way to get these things that are in so many kitchens across the U.S. to answer questions as well as some of the best LLMs out there?
Well, I think it's Amazon having a stake in kind of the operating system of the future, right? Amazon doesn't make a smartphone. They're beholden to Google and Apple on that front like everybody else is. But Alexa, its core promise back when the software really was cooking and it was the hottest thing in consumer tech was that they had invented the platform of the future, right? They might not have a device in your pocket, but they were trying to invent a companion that could go with you, could sit on your kitchen counter, could live on your smartphone, as an Android app. Could live in other devices, streaming sticks, all that sort of thing. And their vision on that has remained pretty consistent. Amazon will say they're trying to make the best personal assistant out there. They would tell us it's still early days, but they really have lost the zeitgeist since ChatGPT and Friends debuted.
Amazon is obviously a very big company. I'm wondering just how important this is for Amazon to kind of roll out Alexa, GPT, we could call it, in order to continue to compete with the other big tech companies.
I think you can't separate this from the broader artificial intelligence push going on within Amazon. Certainly part of the problem with putting a large language model under the covers of Alexa is Amazon does not have a well-regarded, flagship model that can go toe-to-toe with ChatGPT or Claude by Anthropic. They're still developing their own sort of frontier models that can do the cutting-edge work. So it's very much a scramble inside Amazon right now as they try to infuse generative artificial intelligence to any product line they can, and they're also working on these kind of next-generation models that they hope will, both power Alexa and then also they can sell them to other customers through their cloud computing unit.
Matt Day, Bloomberg News technology reporter, joining us from Seattle. Check out his story along with Austin Carr. It's a Bloomberg exclusive. They got access to internal Amazon sources to get the inside story of Amazon's new Alexa product and those technical challenges that are delaying its rollout. Check it out on the Bloomberg terminal and at bloomberg.com/thebigtake. Well, if you never want to miss a Bloomberg Businessweek story, become a subscriber today. You'll unlock deep reporting and analysis from reporters around the world, including unlimited access to Businessweek. You can check out our offers right now at bloomberg.com/subscribe now. Well, also, when it comes to tech news today, a Bloomberg exclusive, Waymo, Alphabet's autonomous driving unit, was valued at over $45 billion after its latest financing round. We got with us Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV, 11 o'clock Wall Street time on Bloomberg Television. He joins us from our San Francisco bureau. Ed, $45 billion valuation, above $45 billion. Where's the money coming from, and where's the valuation coming from?
Yes, the valuation is super interesting, $45 billion post-money valuation. So it takes into account the $5.6 billion that Waymo raised from Alphabet, the Google parent, and its parent last week. But you'll remember we talked about how it included outside investors like Andreessen Horowitz and Fidelity. And that's where the valuation comes from. But it's so interesting because you can either look at it two ways. That valuation of $45 billion is like many hundreds times what its revenue is right now. It's in the early stages, so maybe it's too high. But if you went on social media, the response to our reporting is, well, hold on. If Tesla's worth whatever it's worth based on its robotaxi prowess, why is Waymo not worth more?
How does Waymo stack up with the other self-driving, competitors in the market right now?
That's the question. Right? And it's really important to distinguish them at a technology level. Waymo wants to run a proprietary ride-hailing service where you summon a robo-taxi like you would an Uber or a Lyft driven by a human. But it has proprietary sensor hardware technology and software that it puts into retrofitted cars. Zoox, which is owned by Amazon by comparison, has a purpose-built vehicle, no steering wheel, no pedals, inward-facing seats. It wants to do both. Design the hardware, all of it, but then have that proprietary ride-hailing service. And then as we've learned in recent weeks, Tesla wants to do both as well. They all compare differently and how they've progressed in their deployment in the real world.
You didn't mention Cruise.
Oh no, I didn't.
Why not?
Ding me on that one.
Well,
because
is
Cruise,
but is that for a reason? Is that because the tech's not it doesn't stack up like it does with these other competitors?
Cruise has suffered the regulatory headwinds more than any other. You'll remember the incident in last year where a cruise vehicle collided with a pedestrian and dragged it for a distance, and how Cruise handled the fallout with that led to regulators basically pulling their on-road access from them. They aren't running a commercial service anymore. They're not charging for rides. They've really fallen behind. And GM, General Motors, the parent of Cruise, has pulled back its financial support, which has meant that Cruise has had to adjust its technology plans as well. Like Zoox, Cruise wanted to do a purpose-built shuttle and also had like eye-watering valuations in its past years when it had raised funds from GM and other outside investors. But it just is a management issue. It's a them problem as much as it is the sort of broader landscape we're talking about with robotaxis.
Ed, you write along with Katie Roof and Jillian Tan from Bloomberg News that Waymo has already delivered upwards of 150,000 paid trips each week. Just put that number into context and how it describes what stage of the business cycle I guess Waymo's in right now.
Well, 150,000 paid trips a week is across 3 markets, San Francisco, LA, and the greater Phoenix area in Arizona. But what I know from Waymo and from speaking to the leadership is that most people take a short trip, 2 to 3 miles. So think about the numbers. When you take a 2 to 3 mile Uber trip in Manhattan or in SF, what does it cost you? Let's say $15, $20. So do the math, 150,000 times $10 or $15 or $20 each week, and then times it by 52, it's just not a lot of revenue. But what they are doing is showing that there is a market there. Riders are willing to pay for the experience of going in a robo-taxi without anyone in the front seat driving the vehicle. And then the question is, how do you scale? At the state level and at the federal level, here in this country at least, you need the approvals from regulators. But it's easier now to see the broader economics in the future.
Okay, so help us out a little bit with the valuation here. I'm looking at Uber's market cap, close to $150 billion. Lyft, a tiny fraction of that, coming in at just $5.3 billion. Would the model for Waymo, and is the model for Waymo going to be just a ride-hailing service?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions for Waymo, and I've tried to ask them, and some they've answered, some they haven't. Think about it this way. You need scale and constant operation to make the economics of this work. So if you're watching us right now on YouTube, we're showing a video of a retrofitted Jaguar I-Pace. The sensors that Waymo uses are expensive. You know, this is the Elon Musk debate. The reason Tesla uses cameras and not LiDAR or radar sensors is because they believe it is scalable. Cameras are cheaper to put on a vehicle than those other sensors are. And so the Waymo is cautious, like all of the robotaxis are, but to answer your question, its valuation is held back by the idea it's subject to regulators, consumer attitudes, the government, in growing state by state and having enough scale where the economics of running a service like that makes sense. It's very hard without having actual deployment to do the math on it.
All right, we'll see what happens at the election and to what extent that changes the deployment. Certainly the regulatory issues are a big part of this. Ed, before we let you go, we have about a minute left.
Sure.
We were talking about ChatGPT and OpenAI bringing the search features to ChatGPT in a challenge to Google. You actually have access to this version of ChatGPT. What is it? How does it work? What have you found?
Yeah. So look, I pay for the premium version of it. Historically, before today, if you had asked ChatGPT a question, it would be limited by the historic data it's trained on. It couldn't give you contemporaneous information, although if you pushed it, it could piece together web links. Now you can activate search within the app and it will list information for you, also attributing a link, and it will curate it. So for example, you could ask, what's the weather in San Francisco? A link to AccuWeather, a description that it summarizes via AI, and then I'll say, well, I'm going to go outside then. It's nice. Tell me which restaurants I can sit outside at. Again, it's just an advanced search, something more akin to Google, and you guys said, right, Google stock fell because this is real comp.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. Ed Ludlow, co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV out there in San Francisco.
2:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. The Federal Reserve's preferred measure of underlying U.S. inflation posted its biggest monthly gain since April, bolstering the case for a slower pace for interest rate cuts following last month's outside reduction. We checked the markets all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is now down 95 points. That's more than 1.6%. NASDAQ is down 493 points. That's more than 2.6%. And the Dow is down 256 points. The Russell 2000 index is now down 23 points. That's a little more than 1%. The 10-year Treasury yield is at 4.26% and the 2-year yield at 4.14%. OpenAI has launched ChatGPT Search. It's positioned the company to better compete with other search engines like Google and Bing and Perplexity. Paying subscribers will get to use this new search function as soon as today. Everybody else has to wait a few weeks up to a few months. Comcast says it's considering spinning off its cable networks into a new company because of fewer subscribers. Comcast reported third-quarter sales and profit that exceeded analysts' expectations after the company's NBC division got a lift from the Summer Olympics. Comcast shares now more than 3% higher. Join a special edition of Bloomberg Technology live at 6 p.m. tonight on Bloomberg Radio and Television for a conversation with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger. That's 6 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg Radio, on Bloomberg Television, and on YouTube. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Tim Stenovec and Emily Grafea.
Thanks, Amy, for that update. Really do appreciate it. We just heard from Amy, stocks under pressure today. The NASDAQ composite down 2.7%, while the S&P 500 down about 1.6%. If we look at how things are looking for the month, well, stocks wiping out their October gains. Microsoft and Meta platforms weighing heavily on the trade after disappointing outlooks. Apple, Amazon are on deck for later today. We hear from the Fed next week. And then, there's the election happening as well. So a lot for an investor to be thinking about. Let's see what Jeff Krumpelman is thinking about. He's chief investment strategist and head of equities at Mariner Wealth Advisors. They've got about $115 billion in assets under management. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. Did I miss anything in terms of big things that you're focused on? The Fed, the election, mega cap tech earnings. What else is on your mind?
Well, I think it's not just what's on our mind, but what are people going to read in the headlines, that this is a game of psychology, right? And it can push people's kind of moods around a little bit on a temporary basis. So the only thing I would add to that I've seen more lately is there seems to be concern over this uplift in yields. And you've seen the 10-year Treasury go from 360 or so, which was, I think, abnormally low. I think the bond market got a little ahead of itself, and now we're back to 420, and I think people are extrapolating that out to what does that mean about the deficit and that kind of stuff.
Why have we seen stocks not move as a result of the yields moving?
Well, it depends on why yields are going up. And if we had a wild card risk that was out there while everybody else is talking about election and geopolitical and speculation about the Fed and the items that you mentioned, we're really focused on that rise in yields. And back in October 23, we had a moment where they went from 4 to 5, and 5 is kind of a threshold that you don't want to cross in a surge. I think they're going up because the economic data has actually been very good in October. We've had some positive surprises across the board, whether you're talking about service activity in the PMI, if you're talking about retail sales. We did a GDP report coming in at 2.8% with contributions from consumer, business, and government, all three. Labor productivity is on the rise. Labor costs are down, and net, while everything's not perfect, it never is. It's better than expected, and that tends to keep stocks holding in, even though you have this fear. So if yields are going up because things are stronger, that's way better than if you have yields going up because people are scared half to death about reaccelerating inflation and a deficit that's just out of control. And I don't think that's what's going on.
So does that mean then if we have a Fed meeting next week and we don't get a cut, or we see traders really pricing back how many cuts we're going to get over the next few months, stocks will be just totally fine with that?
No, I won't say that. Whenever we do our forecasts, we're looking out 12, 15 months. And like I said, this is a game of facts and psychology. And there are disconnects between those two from time to time. So if people want to freak out, I think there's valid reasons for the Fed going slow. I mean, if we're heading into a recession, you got to act. But what's so bad about 2.8% growth and inflation that is back to 2 to 2.5% level targets? I don't care what they do. They said at the beginning of the year, we got to cut 6 to 7. This is what I heard. Jeff, if the Fed doesn't cut 6 or 7 times, we're going to have a meltdown. And now you can kind of say, well, how many times did they cut? Oh,
Where's
yeah,
the meltdown?
1.
Yeah.
Where's the meltdown? That was at 4,700. Now we're 5,800. So, I take it easy,
Okay.
relax.
Speaking of people freaking out.
Yeah.
Kava. Okay.
Yeah.
People freak out about Kava. This is a stock that's up 210% so far this year.
Yeah.
When it comes to consumer discretionary, it's one of your picks.
Yeah.
There's still room to run here?
You know what?
Their valuation, people say there's some analysts out there who say this valuation is a little bonkers.
So I was here a couple months ago, and the stock was at 80. It's at 133. So I'll take that side of the trade all day.
You're not done with it, though.
I'm not done with it. I think it has higher. And here's what's not appreciated. They have 13% same-store sales growth. Let me repeat that. The economy's growing, 2.8%. They're growing 13% same-store sales. They're opening new units at a pace of 15% annually. Their margins are going up because they are operating efficiently. They're introducing digital. They're introducing stake and all these things, and they're going to be able to cut back on their marketing spend. I love stocks that have great catalysts, and I think there's a long runway here that's unappreciated, and they don't have a lot of competition in Mediterranean. They've kind of got the category.
Are you a big Kava person?
I feel like I almost can't even comment here because I'm a customer.
You're just
of Kava,
it's like you have to
we appreciate that.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I personally think it tastes really good. There's no location of the office, though. What about tech? What kind of tech stocks do you like? Because obviously big tech today is selling off quite a bit.
Yeah, we have 6 different strategies ranging from conservative to aggressive. And so we have some purely growth strategies that are benched the Russell 1000 growth. And what I love about that particular strategy that we run, and I don't want to talk too much about it, it's just simply that we believe growth still has a place. The day's not over, but the Mega 7, the Magnificent 7 or 8, whatever you want to call it, they're getting a little tired. Their fundamentals are fine, but they've made a big move. So we, as the market has broadened out, we own them, but we're underweight and have been underweight. And we've been able to do really well because there's a lot in tech. And I give you some of the picks today, like Oracle, like Synopsys. Oracle is AI, at a reasonable price. Maybe that's a new, stock strategy that we'll, develop. But I think that AI is not going away, and cloud's not going away. So therefore, you need to be there, and there's a lot of companies that can benefit from that. By the same token, we just bought PNC a couple weeks ago, and the younger guys on the team are looking at me like, "What are you talking about? A regional bank? You got to be kidding me!"
And what do you say to them?
I say, well, let's see. You're going to be able to unleash some reserves as the credit markets are holding up pretty well. You've got a re-steepening in the yield curve. Let's see what banks do. Oh, yeah, they borrow short and they lend long. And so you get that steepening, and that's where you make your margin. And they're growing in the Sun Belt, and loan growth is solid. They're cheap. So this is a good day for, some good old dinosaur-like, thinking. And you balance the two. I like cloud, but I also like, some good value stories.
Very briefly, we only have less than a minute left.
Yeah, sure.
The election on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Short-term risk around election day?
Well, again,
around the outcome?
I would go right back to psychology, and our advice has been pretty consistent. And it's boring. It doesn't make headlines. It is simply so many people want to sound smart, and they come out and they tell you, oh, we've studied all the policy differences, and this person is going to do this, and this person's going to do that. And so as a result, this is what you need to do. That is a fool's errand. Don't do it. You got plenty of time. What people campaign on is seldom what they propose. What they propose seldom gets passed. And you can't, even if you're perfect on those 2 factors, you don't know how investors are going to react. So,
Jeff Krumpelman, good to see you. Thanks for swinging by our studio. Normally in Cincinnati, Jeff's here in our Bloomberg Business Week studio. Chief Investment and Strategist and Head of Equities at Mariner Wealth Advisors. Coming up, more Business Week right after this.
will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That's Emily Grafeo in for Carol Masser. I'm Tim Stenevec. Taking a look at the markets right now. We're seeing a bit of red on the screen on this Halloween 2024. The NASDAQ Composite down by 2.7%. The S&P 500 down 1.6%. The Dow down 0.5 percentage point. Emily, big tech, the Mag 7, weighing on today's trade.
Yeah, a lot of concerns here from investors that maybe all of that investment in AI that these big tech companies have made earlier in the year, it's not exactly playing out as they would have expected. And we're seeing some really big declines, Tim, in these big tech stocks.
Hey, what would you like to hear about on Bloomberg Radio? Help make shows like ours even better by taking our Bloomberg Audience Survey. To do that, just visit youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast and click the link in our profile or community section to take the survey. It's hosted by our partners over at Material. Fill it out now at youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcasts. Well, the CDC has now linked 90 cases of E. coli to McDonald's since the first case was discovered more than a week ago. And in Iowa, health officials are investigating a suspected case of Lassa fever after a resident died on Monday. Safe to say, public health is everywhere in our lives, and it's crucial to keeping us safe. It's also the subject of the new documentary, The Invisible Shield. It's a 4-part series. It reveals a little-known truth. The series is made possible by Bloomberg Philanthropies and Radical Media, and the finale airs on Bloomberg Television tonight at 6 p.m. Wall Street time. We should note Bloomberg Philanthropies is the philanthropic arm of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg Radio. We got with us Dr. Amy Acton. She's former director of the Ohio Department of Health. She was the first woman physician to ever hold that position. She participated in the Invisible Shield. She joins us from Columbus, Ohio. Doctor, good to have you with us this afternoon. I think with the pandemic in 2020 and the aftermath, people started to see public health differently. But I think for a lot of us, it's kind of faded into the background. The pandemic, there's so much more to public health than just monitoring potential pandemics.
There really is. You know, one of the things people don't realize is that we gained 30 years life expectancy in the last century. When my grandfather was born in 1900, on average, you were expected to live to about 48 years of age. Some of us would do better, some worse. You were also expected to lose at least 1 out of 3 of your children sometime during their childhood. That was the way of life for almost all of our history. But we gained 30 years, and only 5 of those years were due to everything I learned in med school as a doctor, the stuff we need in the one case. But 25 years came from things that we can only solve collectively. It began with clean water, safe food, child labor laws, to everything we think of today, traffic safety laws. You know, it goes on, but that is such an important thing. We gained, you know, we live on average, my grandfather made it to 84, but we know for the first time we started going backwards. Even before COVID hit, our country is living on average 5 years less than most other advanced countries.
Is that because of the opioid crisis? Is it because of drug overdoses, or is it because of a multitude of things?
It's a multitude of things. I was obviously trained in healthcare originally, but we put about $3.6 trillion into healthcare, but less than 3% of that amount actually goes to preventing the expensive bad things. That is one thing we do a little differently. Before even COVID hit, that trend had started backwards. Actually saw 3 years lost in the years right before COVID hit, and obviously that set us back more. But it was due to things that are often chronic illnesses, diabetes, heart disease, but also intentional and unintentional injuries. We have at a higher rate than our peer countries.
What's the connection between public health and social media and information? It seems like nowadays there's so much information online about how to live a healthy life, and maybe not all of it is accurate.
Our wanting to live a quality of life, I think of blue zones, how we all sort of now aspire to live to 100. That is something that is actually not all a bad thing that is happening, but in terms of the information, it's really important. This documentary takes you through all the way back to the 1400s, the Black Plague, and takes us up through the modern era of communication. One of the things that I think about in communication is our Surgeon General, who did an advisory that the epidemic underlying so much of what we're experiencing here, including the unmooring that is going on, is due to loneliness and isolation. And if you think about it, in some ways, we're more hyper-connected as a world and a community, and One Health means that viruses also interconnect us and a whole community instantly. But we're also feeling more disconnected, and that perhaps is why we're seeing so many of these diseases of a despair. Other countries are actually creating czars. They have 20 years of data that shows, and I really recommend people check out the Surgeon General's advisory on human connection and loneliness, because it talks about ways that we as individuals and relationships can be more connected.
Dr. Acton, got to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us. Dr. Amy Acton, former director of the Ohio Department of Health. She was the first woman physician to ever hold that position. Once again, The Invisible Shield by Bloomberg Philanthropies and Radical Media, the finale airing tonight on Bloomberg Television at 6 p.m. Wall Street time. We got a great show coming up on Bloomberg Business Week. We speak to a former Department of Labor official next.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Cammie McCormick. The U.S. says North Korean soldiers are in Russia and moving toward the border with Ukraine. 8,000 of them, and it's believed they could be deployed for combat in the coming days. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Russia has been training DPRK soldiers in artillery, UAVs, basic infantry operations, including trench clearing, indicating that they fully intend to use these forces in frontline operations.
The presidential campaigning moves west today. Donald Trump is in New Mexico speaking about the border.
They're murderers, they're killers, they're drug addicts, they're drug dealers, they're gang members.
Before leaving Wisconsin, Kamala Harris criticized Trump's remarks that he'd protect women whether they like it or not. CBS News correspondent Linda Kenyon has more.
I am putting it all on the field.
Because she says the stakes are so high.
The choice being offered by Donald Trump is about going backward, about a constant emphasis on degrading the American American people and our capacity versus a track that is about bringing the country together.
Telling reporters in Wisconsin, if Trump wins, among other things, he vows to repeal the Affordable Care Act and further limit abortion rights. Linda Kenyon, CBS News, Washington.
The death toll from flooding in Spain is now at 158. Workers have been clearing massive piles of cars. There are still dozens of people missing. Jim Krasula reports there was trouble on a cross-country flight.
A Florida man identified as Everett Chad Nelson has been charged in a bloody and seemingly random assault about 2 hours into a United Airlines cross-country flight from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. He allegedly started punching a sleeping passenger who was deaf and nonverbal. He suffered black eyes and a bloody nose. Other passengers stopped the attack, and the suspect was subdued until the flight landed. Jim Krasula, CBS News.
A moving company says it's expecting to be given access to Rudy Giuliani's Manhattan apartment after the former New York mayor missed a deadline to turn over belongings to two former Georgia election workers. They won a $148 million defamation suit against him. Some economic news today from business reporter Jason Brooks.
The preferred inflation gauge for the Federal Reserve rose 2.1% in September, cooling down from August and meeting estimates. Inflation did grow slightly stronger on a month-by-month basis compared to August. Wall Street odds are overwhelmingly favoring a quarter-point rate cut from the Fed at its meeting next week.
The Dow is down 200 points. This is CBS News.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a good afternoon, everybody, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio in New York. It is Bloomberg Business Week. We're streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Tim Stenevec. Carol Masser is out today. Bloomberg News' Emily Griffeo is in. And you're here tomorrow, too, right?
I am.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thanks for doing that.
If I survive this
you'll
Halloween
survive.
night.
Oh, yeah. On this Halloween, as we just heard, stocks are lower. The S&P 500 down 1.5%. The NASDAQ down at 2.5%, the Dow down 0.5 percentage point. Big tech is certainly taking a hit today. We're seeing mega cap tech stocks lower, dragging the major indices lower. We're going to have much more on the trade in just a minute.
Yeah, you can really see those tech stocks underperforming even as yields dip lower, as investors maybe price out some better than expected inflation data, some higher than expected inflation data, and maybe less Fed rate cuts.
Oh, well, perhaps the data that we get tomorrow will indicate or help indicate what the Fed does next. That's tomorrow's payrolls report. We got in just a few minutes a former U.S. Department of Labor official joining us with what to watch in tomorrow's payrolls report.
Also, the Chief Experience Officer at Ledger and former Chief Digital Officer of LVMH joins us.
Yeah, Ian Rogers is going to be here in just a few minutes. And then there's an earnings bonanza today.
Some companies that I've never heard of.
Yeah,
Tim.
like, for example?
Amazon?
Yeah, that one's reporting. All eyes on the cloud there. And then Apple coming at 4:30. We are going to bring you those numbers as soon as we get them. All that and more coming up over the next 2 hours on Bloomberg Business Week. First up, a check on the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Amy Morris in for Charlie Pellet. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Tim, as you mentioned, stocks are under pressure. They're wiping out all their October advance. Microsoft and Meta Platforms weighing heavily on Wall Street trading after their disappointing outlooks. We can tell you Microsoft shares right now more than 5% lower, and Meta shares are down 4.6%. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is about 1.5% lower. That's lower by 86 points. NASDAQ down 452. The Dow is down 212 points. The Russell 2000 index down by 21 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.28%. The 2-year yield at 4.15%. Even Bitcoin is lowered now, down 3.1%. Estee Lauder pulled its guidance for the year, citing uncertainty over a new chief executive and weak demand in China. The New York-based company also cut its dividend to, quote, a more appropriate payout ratio to create more financial flexibility. Estee Lauder shares now 22% lower, so I was looking for something that might be a lot higher. The auto insurance platform Root is having a really good day. Its best day ever. The Columbus, Ohio-based firm's stock price soared as much as 192%. Its biggest intraday advance on record. Right now, shares of Root, an auto insurance platform, now 92% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, you can subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Tim Stenovec and Emily Guerfeo.
Amy, thanks for that update. Certainly do appreciate it. Investors looking ahead to the all-important non-farm payrolls report tomorrow morning. It's the last big data point policymakers will watch before their meeting next week. Also a huge data point before the election on Tuesday. We got with us Jane Oates, Senior Policy Advisor at Working Nation. It's a media company that focuses on the future of work. Jane, also a former Assistant Secretary of Employment and Training in the Obama administration. She joins us from New Orleans. Jane, good to have you with us. Expectations, as we heard from Molly Smith a little earlier in our program, really range from, in fact, a negative print of 10,000 jobs lost to up to 180,000 jobs added. The median, according to the survey of economists from Bloomberg, 105,000. What are you watching?
I'm really more optimistic. I'm 150 to 200,000, especially after the strong ADP number this week. You know, adding 233,000. That's the highest since July of 23 in the private sector job count. So I'm pretty optimistic.
What sectors specifically are you expecting to see the most robust gains in?
So, you know, we've gotten spoiled. We all think healthcare. So I think that will continue to get us where we want to be. I mean, the most disappointing one, I think, will be manufacturing, because I think we're really starting to see the impact in the supply chain of a 7-week strike at Boeing.
Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, you know, it's hard for me. I mean, you're not on the inside. You want the best for those workers. You want them to get their old pension plan back. But boy, the smaller manufacturing suppliers in that chain, I think, are really starting to hurt. And you know what, Tim? This is not just a Pacific Northwest issue. Those suppliers are probably all over the country, definitely into the Midwest. I don't know how much more they can take. You know what I mean? Especially the small guys. You think the people that make things like screws, you know what I mean, and nails. That's a big client, and 7 weeks with no new business is tough.
I know you said that you are maybe more optimistic than what the consensus is expecting just for tomorrow. But, you know, what about just zooming out here? We have seen the unemployment rate ticking to, you know, around historically low levels. What is your kind of overall gauge of just the exact strength here of the labor market in America right now?
Look, the consumer is keeping this economy humming. They keep spending, right? So you see, you know, moderate to really kind of optimistic gains in leisure and hospitality every month. You know, that's a good sign. People are traveling, they're eating out, they're buying things. That's what's powering this economy. And especially when you look at the wage gains so far, you know, we're looking at a 4% wage gain year to year. And with inflation going down, there's no indication that people are going to stop spending.
How do you kind of square the wage gains and also inflation? Because, of course, we got data today that was showing that the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation is ticking a little bit hotter than economists had expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think we still have terrible prices from pre-COVID, right, in regular everyday grocery items. You know, people are paying much more now than they were before COVID. And gas was horrible. It's starting to come down, but it's still more than people would like to pay. So I think those along with other big ticket items like housing and, you know, like things like even health insurance. I mean, all these things are going up. People are having a hard time, but it's amazing to me. They keep spending. And, you know, that's just great for the economy.
To you about watch what consumers do, not what they say. That said, how that manifests in the election on Tuesday. Because you served in the Obama administration. You understand the connection between voters, politics, and of course, what's happening with the economy, Jane. We see time and time again, the economy is the most important factor to many voters out there. We also at the same time see, according to a lot of research, Gallup yesterday, I cited this yesterday on the show, a Gallup poll from earlier this month says that the majority of Americans don't necessarily feel like the economy is on the right track. How do you balance that with what we're seeing in the economy?
Yeah, I think it's really hard, Tim. You get right to the heart of it. I mean, God forbid, let's never get back to where it was when I was in the Obama administration, you know, during the Great Recession. But it's really hard because people, everyday people, real people who aren't policy nerds and aren't, you know, nerds like you guys listening to this every day, they judge the economy by what things cost. And as I said, things still cost more than they're comfortable with. But I do think, you know, people, you look at that jobs number from last month, you look at the JOLTS number from this week, still 7.4 million open jobs. You know, a lot of people still unemployed. We're not done that job. But that's the kind of stuff that we're looking at big picture. I think getting people to understand that it's a mixture of what you're feeling at your kitchen table and what we're seeing. Because those same people at their kitchen table, if they're in a 401k, they made money on the stock market in the last year. You know, they've been doing really well. It's not just people that we think of as investors. So I think we have to get people to understand it's a bigger picture than just the cost of eggs and gas.
I'm wondering how, if you're a politician running for office, what do you say to get your voters to kind of understand that message that you just unpacked?
You know, I think it's so hard because you know that most people get their news in a flash, you know, in 15, 30-second bites. And it's really hard to get into the weeds there. I think this is the time, if you're running for public office, that you have to do things like town halls so you can dig deeply into these issues. You can't do it in commercials. You know, you can't do it just in sound bites. It has to be really sitting with people, not only telling them the facts, but listening and trying to understand what are the costs that maybe we could control a little bit. You know, what are some things that local communities could do, whether it's, you know, in Northern Virginia, they have a free bus route so people don't have to pay to get to work. That's a really interesting thing. So I think we have to listen to and look at what communities are doing to solve this problem and really to get at the things that are causing people to really struggle in what should be a really good, strong economy.
So Jane, it raises the question about the messaging that we've heard from Vice President Harris, because she is the incumbent. The Democrats are the incumbent party. You served in the Obama administration in the Labor Department. How is her messaging in your view? Has her messaging in your view been good on the economy? Has it been, where could it be improved? How would you grade it?
Well, you know, Working Nation concentrates on solutions. So I'm going to be on the positive side here. I think talking about things like childcare really resonates, not only with the parents of children, but with the grandparents, because a lot of times those grandparents are being called into active duty when their daughter or son can't get, you know, quality childcare. So I think concentrating on healthcare costs, concentrating on childcare costs, I think that's really important. You know, I think the idea about trying to control costs, look, we're a free country. We're a capitalistic society, and thank God for that. We want businesses to stay strong. So I think when it gets into this like cost control and price gouging and things like that, it's a little unclear to me what could actually be done. But there are clear things that can be done in childcare. We could make permanent the childcare tax credit. There are clear things that can be done when we talk about health care. We could make sure that the state systems in the Affordable Care Act are providing the most affordable options for every family to make sure they can get it. I mean, so I think sometimes the message is too large, but overall, I think the Vice President has been really clear on those two issues that I think from my conversations and my colleagues at Working Nation, as we talk to people, really child care is really a major issue. And, so is some of this stuff about making sure we're able to control the prices that we can control. I mean, I don't know what we can release more oil reserves to put down gas.
Hey, we only have 30 seconds left, but on the child care thing, one thing that just blows my mind is that dependent care FSA has not changed since 1986. The limit, exactly right. 5,000 per house. What is going on? We only have 30 seconds left. What is going on here?
Tim, it's crazy. Like, let's light a fire under Congress and get them to activate, because the same thing, employers are doing so much training for their incumbent workers. That 5250 was in the same set of bills in 1986. 5250 bought you a college degree, in 1986.
Yeah.
It buys you barely a semester right now.
Oh, for the dependent care FSA, it buys you a couple months of daycare. It's a little wild.
Yeah, that is really not enough.
Yeah, it's not enough. Hey, Jane, thanks so much for joining us. Always appreciate you coming on the program. Jane Oates, Senior Policy Advisor over at Working Nation. It's a media company. It focuses on the future of work. She's also former Assistant Secretary of Employment and Training in the Obama administration. As I mentioned, that payrolls report coming tomorrow. 105,000 is what economists surveyed by Bloomberg expect. Last month, it was 254,000. Up next, we talk digital with Ian Rogers.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. OpenAI is crafting a direct challenge to Google, adding a search function to ChatGPT. It's called ChatGPT Search and lets users search for timely information and then get responses with inline attribution to news publishers and other data sources. Paying subscribers will see the rollout as soon as today. S&P's monthly gain streak has been broken. It would have been the longest since 2021 as investors are grappling with corporate results. We check the markets all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 down 82 points, NASDAQ down 428, and the Dow down 209. Alphabet's autonomous driving unit Waymo was valued at more than $45 billion. That includes its latest round of financing led by Alphabet. The company competes with Uber in ride-hailing and has been rapidly expanding the number of rides it offers in cities including San Francisco and Phoenix. Tech earnings wrap up this afternoon when we hear from Amazon, Intel, and Apple. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Tim Stenovec and Emily Graffeo.
Hey, Amy, thanks for that. Do appreciate it. Taking a look at stocks right now. We just got an update from Amy Morris. Looking closer at the NASDAQ 100 down 2.1%. Taking a look at what is actually moving there. Supermicrocomputer down 13%. Regeneron down 10%. But what's really dragging the index lower is mega cap tech, Emily. Microsoft, NVIDIA, Broadcom, Meta Platforms, Amazon, and Apple.
Yeah, it's been not a great earnings season, or at least we haven't seen the stock reaction to these earnings be strong. Because when you look under the hood, a lot of the actual earnings results were still beating expectations, but at least in the case of Microsoft, the guidance disappointed. It just wasn't enough for investors.
And we'll see what happens a little later today with Amazon and Apple at 4:30.
Yeah, two big companies.
Speaking of Apple, our next guest has worked at that company. Ian Rogers has been at the forefront of the transition from analog to digital, particularly when it comes to music, pretty much his entire career. He was the founding webmaster of BeastieBoys.com. He was at the company behind Winamp. You guys remember Winamp if you're over 40 or 40, like me. That was how you listen to music on your computer for the first time. Then he was CEO of Beats Music about a year and a half before it was sold to Apple for $3 billion. Then chief digital officer over at LVMH, the parent company of Louis Vuitton, Sephora, Hennessy, and more. He's now chief experience officer over at Ledger. It's the Paris-based digital asset security company. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Welcome back.
Thank you. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. A little spooky in today's trade. Yeah. I want you to give us an update on Ledger, because last time you were here, we spent a lot of time talking about big picture, where we are when it comes to Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. Where are we in Web 3, and what are you doing at Ledger to harness that?
That's a great question, because I think it's one of these things where, like the dot-com boom and then bust, and then...
So that's Web 1.
That's Web 1 and slow growth. You know, I think we spent, 21 and 22 teaching people about the promise of digital ownership. And, then we had FTX and the fallout that came after it, and you end up with that sort of trough of disillusionment. But there is a real invention behind that. This, invention of digital scarcity will be a part of our lives. We've got, huge businesses that are built on effectively digital renting, and we have a new primitive, which is digital ownership, and that leads to Bitcoin and a ton of other things. But just like with the dot-com boom, there was a lot of promise and idea, and then a lot of it had to be built. And, you know, the whole thing didn't kind of tip over into the mainstream until 2010, 2012, and onward. And that's really what we're doing is we're building that. We're building on that promise. Now, you know, today is Bitcoin's 16th anniversary, the 16-year anniversary of the Bitcoin white paper, which is, you know, I think kind of why this is Bitcoin's year. It's been around long enough. It's been attacked and, you know, frontwards, backwards, sideways long enough, and people go, oh wait, an uninflatable, you know, scarce digital good has you know, a reason for existence. And so I think that's kind of where we are. For us, we just keep continuing to build around that. There's crypto, and then there's more, you know, because really we are a digital security company, and we secure not only digital assets, but also your logins. And, you know, as you kind of point to that Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, you know, Web 1 was, you know, all of your data behind a username and a password. Yeah. Web 2 is log in with Google, log in with Facebook. You know, we've all lived in that world for 15 or so years now. And really, you know, where we are going to is a world where the user has control and can choose who I share my data with. We've all kind of seen the perils of our data just kind of being consumed by anybody who wants it. And, you know, now we have a lot of backtracking.
So that's removing the data from the cloud and storing our data on physical devices that we carry with us at all times?
Well, I think it's a question of what data are we talking about and how do you want it? I mean, if it's healthcare data, then, you know, we care a lot about, you know, where it's stored. If it's, you know, did I like an Instagram post? Maybe we're less concerned about the publicness of that little heart, right? So, and there's a lot in between. But what we have is like a lack of user control, first of all. And I don't think any of us are really comfortable with that. We all know enough about it, you know, kind of post Cambridge Analytica, et cetera, where we first thought about like, I guess maybe it does matter where all this personal data is. But, you know, it's even just inconvenient. Think about agentic AI applications, right? Like let's say you want to just ask an AI agent to book a flight to Miami for you. How is it going to do that, right? Does it have access to your, you know, does the agent have loaded into it your payment information, your Delta login, or, you know, whatever it is? Like, you know, no, ultimately you, the user, should have that information, and it should ask you, may I have this information to do this on your behalf? And then you say yes or no, depending on what you as the user prefer. So I think that, you know, it's not something that I think the average person spends a lot of time thinking about, but I think it is something that the average person can understand when you have the conversation.
You know, that example that you just brought up about using AI to maybe book a flight for you, in that kind of instance, it seems like what's so important is not only control, but also identity. How is your company, and how are you looking at the market right now, and how it's able to kind of balance the growth in AI, but also verifying who's human, who's themselves, and then who is the machine?
Yeah, I think you have, you know, it's what we've been doing in crypto is verifying that you have made a transaction, right? What we are going to need to do as humans later is, one, prove we're human. You know, I mean, think about it. If you could just, you know, prove that you are or are not human.
Are we human or are we dancer?
Yeah, exactly. I think if we just have the ability to prove that we are human, then I'm a unique human. I am this unique human. That's kind of what we do with our passports, right? You know, I think that we will need that. I mean, we will need in the future to know that it is actually me that's speaking into this microphone, and it wasn't altered, you know, somewhere in the path before it got to the listener, right? We can see already that, you know, that these will be things that you will need to know, and we do have the technology to do it. I think it's exactly where we are. We can see that it will be necessary. We have the technology to do it, but we don't have the systems at any scale. It'll take, you know, 10 to 20 years to build that.
You need buy-in from companies on the other side to do this. And I can share an example from today. There's somebody like spoofing me on Twitter. I went to report it. And in order to do that now on X, since Elon bought it, it's very difficult. And I had to solve this like 6-part puzzle to prove that I was a human and that I wasn't a bot. The whole system crashed, actually, at the end, and I wasn't able to ultimately report it. But to me, doing that, there has to be a better way.
It's such a great example because it's such an obvious example. And there are people that are out there right now pretending to be Ledger on Twitter. You'll see them or on X. I'm sorry.
And that has real value. No, I don't have real value.
People
that has real
people
value.
lose their life savings because someone is masquerading and saying they are someone that they aren't. So it is a very real problem. It's not just an annoying problem. It's a problem that harms people. It would be possible for these platforms to say, hey, the way that you identify yourself, you need to, first of all, use something like Ledger, which, very difficult for a bot to do that at scale.
For people who aren't familiar with it, and there are many of these devices out there in the wild, but they're by no means ubiquitous. You guys have raised more than $500 million. Give people an idea what the devices are that you
Sure. So I brought one of the new Ledger devices with me. This is a Ledger Flex. What these are is they are stewards of your private key. So when you're doing crypto or cryptography generally, such as a login, your private key is the key to saying you are who you say you are. So these devices have in them the same secure chip that is in your credit card or in your passport, but they protect your secrets. And so they are able to allow you to prove that you are who you say you are. So in the case of crypto, that is, I am the owner of that wallet that contains that value, and I approve that transaction. That's what they do in the case of crypto, but also, in the case of simply being my login to Google. If you use a 2FA, two-factor authentication device or a passkey device, that's your way of saying, I'm using a very strong way of proving to you that I am the owner of this account because I can cryptographically sign and prove to you that I am the owner of this account. So that's what they do. So if you then apply that to the problem that you had, it would be, X could say, look, first of all, we need some proof that you're really a unique human before you create a new account, right? Or maybe you're not a unique human. Maybe you're creating your fourth profile on X, but I would like to know that all four of these profiles are tied to the same unique human. That's a decision that they could make. It's why, it's a difference between a service like Telegram and a service like Signal. Signal says anybody can sign up with a username. Telegram says anyone can sign up with a username. And Signal says, no, you must at least have a unique phone number, right? And these are ways of just kind of preventing that fraud and spam. But there are better ways of preventing that. If you look at what Sam Altman is doing with World, formerly known as WorldCoin.
Yeah, the eye scanning thing, right?
This is, there are people have mixed feelings about it, but this is primarily the problem he's trying to solve. Can you prove that you are a unique human? There are, very real, if a site like X or an application like X said, we want you to prove that you are a human and a unique human before you create an account. Obviously, we could get rid of a lot of that fraud and potentially like a lot of that, that at scale fraud. So I think these things are coming. We're living, if you think about it, we're at the end of a cycle, right? This cycle started around, you could say 1998, but I would argue really more like 2008 is where this kind of cycle really started. And now these applications exist at scale. We have mobile phones at scale, and we have these problems at scale. So now we'll enter into a new cycle that will leverage this new tool, digital scarcity, proof. It's really proof more than anything else. It's and you can use that proof in a number of ways. Just one, to solve the problem that you just described.
Just quickly, who is Ledger's intended audience? Is it people who work within tech, or is it, I don't know, senior citizens who really need that digital security because they're maybe more susceptible to getting hacked?
Just like if you would ask, who's Google's audience, the answer is everybody that uses the internet. Who is Ledger's audience? It's everyone who has digital value. So that's a relatively small number of early adopters today. They do run the gamut in terms of demographic. I mean, you have young people, and really there is definitely a generational divide. I was at a wedding recently, and everyone my age said, we don't know what Ian does. He's a geek, and he's always been a geek. And the people who were 27 years old went, oh my God, you work at Ledger? Dude, he works at Ledger. So I can feel that generational divide. But we do have people of all ages, because people of all ages have found interest in digital value. Increasingly, we mentioned that security key application, which has logins. Yeah. Well, that takes us from kind of the hundreds of millions of people who own digital value to the billions of people who have a login problem.
Ian, always good to see you. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
Every time you come to New York, you got to swing by the studio. Ian Rogers, a Chief Experience Officer over at Ledger, the Paris-based digital asset security company. Coming up next, we drive to the close. This is Bloomberg.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris, and stocks are under pressure today. Let's go to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here's Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Amy. That's right. U.S. stocks are under pressure after those earnings from Facebook and Microsoft. The Dow is currently down 285 points. S&P's dropped 90, while the NASDAQ is lower by 2.4%. The U.S. 10-year yield at 4.27%. Gold is lower by 38. Oil trading in the green, but Bitcoin, that's sinking by 3.2%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were utilities and energy. Tech and consumer discretionary were under pressure, and leaders to the upside in the Dow, Verizon and Amgen, while Microsoft and Amazon led to the downside. Also after earnings, Estee Lauder fell as much as 27%. That's the most ever. And in the EV space, Ford is shutting down production of the F-150 Cybertruck through the end of the year. Wrapping things up, some of the names reporting after the bell tonight include Amazon and Apple. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Amy?
Thank you, Bill. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, it's time now for the Drive to the Close with Brooke May.
I can't believe it's that time.
I know. I feel like the show has
Sorry,
gone
I
by
interrupted you.
really
I'm sorry.
quickly.
Just keep I'm such an interrupter.
Well, anyway, Brooke May is here with us on Zoom, managing partner at Evans May Wealth. They have about $1.3 billion in AUM, again on Zoom from Carmel, Indiana.
Brooke, welcome. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Happy Halloween.
We're doing pretty well. One thing that Emily and I have been a little obsessed with on this Halloween, happy Halloween, is the sell-off that we're seeing in mega cap tech today, and sort of wondering, okay, well, yeah, the rally, it's pretty big so far this year, and it's powered the major indices to record highs. Is this a sign that it's gotten a little ahead of itself?
I don't necessarily think so. I think we're about where we need to be. Right now, this is reminiscent of the second quarter earnings announcements. Companies have been priced to, earnings expectations have been priced to perfection. These companies need to beat on earnings, on revenue, and give stellar guidance. And really what we're seeing is earnings aren't bad, but guidance isn't necessarily what investors want to see. So these companies are selling off and they're taking the market with us. That said, we feel like big tech really continues to be leadership. However, not all big tech is created equally. When we look at these names, we want to see strong earnings growth relative to the multiple that these stocks are trading at. And some are stretched and others seem pretty fairly valued for what we expect in the quarters to come in the way of earnings.
When you look at the market right now, what is really driving these declines? Because we've now erased the gain that we saw in the S&P 500 for October, and it seems like there's a lot of near-term volatility. We have the election, we have payrolls tomorrow, we have these tech earnings, but really what should investors be focused on? We have the Fed next week. I think I forgot about that one at first. What's really driving this market, Brooke?
Really, it's the fact that we've gone up. We've gone up so much so quickly. And at this point in time, what takes us higher? When we look at earnings going into 2025, we think earnings will be up about 15%. That takes us to about $275 in earnings on the S&P 500. If you apply a 21 multiple to that, you get $57.75, which is where we're trading today. So you can expect some give and take based on headlines whenever you're at this point in the market. All that said, we wouldn't be surprised if we hit 6,000 before year end. That's the trajectory we're on, and we see these pullbacks as buying opportunities.
So when you're taking advantage of these buying opportunities, what exactly, if you can't comment single stocks, that's okay, but are you one of those traders that's buying the Mag 7, the trade that's worked for a lot of this year, or do you kind of support the narrative that it's more about a broadening of the stock market rally, and maybe you go for something like equal weighted stocks?
We continue to like big tech. We don't like all of the Mag 7 though. Some of the companies in the Mag 7, Tesla, for example, seem really expensive. Their earnings growth projections aren't in line really with where they're trading from a PE ratio standpoint. So we like big tech, but we have to be selective. There is a broadening, though, and so we think that there are other areas of the market that you can purchase. When we look at 2024, going into 2024, big tech earnings growth was expected to be 28%, whereas the other 493 names, earnings growth was only expected to be 7%. Now, going into 2025, we think big tech earnings will be up about 17%, and the other 493 names up 13%. So there is a broadening of participation, but again, you have to be selective. Companies are sensitive to interest rates, and so we're looking at companies' balance sheets and their free cash flow because we're in the camp that rates are going to continue to be higher for longer.
What's the risk? What's the biggest risk you see out there right now?
The labor market.
Really?
Well, it's really what's held up this economy for the last 2 years. And if we see it continue to soften, that's going to be an issue because if sentiment changes, the economy can change pretty quickly. That's not our base case, though. We do see a softening, but not meaningfully. Unemployment is at 4.1%. We would expect that to be the next read. We really think that the Fed indicated that they think max unemployment could be 4.4%, and we probably won't reach that if the economy stays on the solid footing that we've had here recently.
Brooke, I'm looking at your notes, and you have maybe, I'm trying to make this kind of geared towards Halloween. I don't know if it's going to work, but maybe a foreboding forecast. This may be the last chance to buy the 10-year Treasury over 4%. Why do you think so? Where do you see yields going?
Well, we think that the Fed will likely cut rates in November and again in December, but possibly pause after that. A few weeks ago, the market was pricing in, 8 or 9 rate cuts in the next 12 to 18 months. And now we're thinking it might be 4 or 5. So that's going to leave rates prolonged a little longer. However, there's no assurance. And we've seen since the first rate cut, the 10-year Treasury go up about 75 basis points. That's significant. That's a significant move. And for years, I had investors say, if I could just get 4% again, I would lock in fixed income. And now we're really having to persuade them to increase their fixed income allocation. With the market being what we would consider to be fully valued, that's a way for us to get some good returns and do it with a little bit more assurance than in the equity market.
Brooke, given the equity market is by many measures expensive right now in many parts of it, not all of it, mind you, how are you putting new money to work right now when you get it?
We're dollar cost averaging into the market. I'm looking at where we are at this point in time and seeing that we are fully valued. There's risk, whenever you're hitting new highs day after day. And so I'm putting money into the market over the next 6 to 12 months.
What are you thinking ahead of the jobs report tomorrow?
We think that it's going to be probably as expected. We wouldn't be surprised if unemployment stays at 4.1% and we add 100,000 jobs, give or take. Really, the estimates, though, are all over the place. Some are indicating a decline and others exuberance in the numbers. So we would expect it to be somewhere in line with consensus, somewhat muted. However, nothing alarming at this point.
What you said the biggest concern is the labor market. What would alarm you? Like, what do you need to see? Because by many measures right now, the labor market is very strong. What would you need to see from tomorrow or from the next few months to indicate that it's not as strong as people think?
If we have a steady climb in the unemployment rate, that's going to be very concerning. If we were to see unemployment come in tomorrow at 4.3% and not adding as many jobs, that's something to take a look at. Clearly we have a softening. A year ago, there were 2 job openings for every unemployed. Now it's closer to parity. I think there's 1.1 job openings for each unemployed. So there was definitely a disconnect in the labor market, and it was almost too strong because that created wage issues. Where we are right now is really the sweet spot. And if we can maintain this level, it's going to, the Fed has orchestrated that soft landing that we all were hoping for.
Brooke, appreciate you joining us. Good to see you again. Happy Halloween. Brooke May, managing partner over at Evans May Wealth, about $1.3 billion in assets under management. She joins us from Indiana. We are just a little over 10 minutes away from the close of trading. Going to get those Amazon earnings, too. All eyes on AWS in the cloud. NASDAQ down 2%. This is Bloomberg.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenovec. That is Emily Griffeo from Bloomberg News Cross Asset Team. She's in for Carol Messer today and tomorrow, and she's got a real day job. She doesn't just do this in the afternoons like I do. So we obviously appreciate you joining us, Emily.
Oh, thank you.
But I also want to take advantage of you being here to talk a little bit about some of the recent stories that you've published. You got a nice one. It's pretty appropriate given it's Halloween.
So every year, the cross asset team at Bloomberg compiles not every year. If it's super cheerful, maybe.
Almost every, some years.
Some years, I'll hedge it like a true journalist. The charts that are scaring Wall Street. So we ask our different sources, portfolio managers, what are you scared of right now? And I have to say, Tim, there was more of a consensus this year than I've noticed in years past, because 3 people, we actually had to, one didn't even make the cut because it was just going to be too redundant in the article. Okay. But 3 people cited S&P 500 valuations.
That's why I just asked Brooke May about this. By so many measures, including PE, we're seeing stocks expensive right now.
I'm going to read what Emily Rowland, co-chief investment strategist for John Hancock Investment Management, told us, and it was a similar kind of message that we heard from other investors. The S&P 500 forward PE is now 21.8, trailing PE 26.5. It leaves forward-looking returns less compelling. We are at the 3rd highest valuations on the S&P 500 in modern history, and then goes on to show a chart of the expected return and the valuation.
In other news, something's got to change here, either price or earnings, for that to go back down to historic levels.
But I think
or historically average.
I think investors tend to underestimate just how long I don't want to call it a bubble, but how long valuations can remain stretched. And so it's really hard to time. You don't want to get out and then miss, a year of upside.
It's impossible to time.
Exactly.
Or so I'm told. Okay, that's one chart showing how expensive stocks are. Another chart in here, U.S. stocks taking over the world? That's scary?
Yes. So that was from Bob Elliott, co-founder and CEO at Unlimited. And his chart was showing basically the U.S. market cap's share of the total market cap of all of the stocks in the world. And it is increasing. It looks like it's now at almost 50%, which it hasn't hit in about 20 years. He said that while there's momentum in the short term for the U.S. to continue to outperform, the current pricing prices a likely implausible concentration in earnings and wealth into U.S. companies forever in the future. Essentially, don't put all your eggs in one basket, Tim.
Okay, I've heard that before.
But, that's another theory that hasn't worked out for many years. Investing in international stocks, it hasn't been a good bet.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know when to time it.
Every year, we get people on our program that say, okay, this is the year that international beats U.S., or this is the year that, Europe overtakes U.S. We got some China bulls. They're fewer and further between now than they used to be. But, they say this is the year, and it's the U.S. that has just outpaced the world for many of the previous years.
I have to give one shout out also to Wes Krill at Dimensional Fund Advisors. Everyone has to read this article because they have to look at just the effort that went into this chart. It's about ETF closures, and each vertical bar in the chart is a tombstone. So this year, 140 ETFs have closed, often due to the funds just not getting enough assets. And this chart, I don't know if you're looking at it, Tim, it has little,
that one's really
little
spooky.
tombstones.
Yeah, I don't see that one.
And it says RIP to these 140 funds that have died this year.
RIP. Oh, I got it. I'm looking at the right one. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong story.
You got to appreciate whoever designed that chart.
Oh, that one is a good one. Yeah, RIP, 140. Okay.
So everyone go check out my article on
This
the
is really cool.
I was
looking at, I'm sorry, I was looking at your 5 things.
Oh.
So I didn't get to see all the charts, but now I see all the charts.
This is in the longer article.
Emily Griffeo. She's going to be with me for the next hour. And tomorrow as Welsh from Bloomberg News' Cross Asset Team. Coming up next, we're going to count you down to the close. It is Bloomberg's The Closing Bell, and it starts right now.
Right here on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. Keep it here on Bloomberg.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
We're about 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. I'm Scarlett Fu here with Bonnie Quinn, and here to help take you through the closing bell, we've got a global simulcast. We're joined now by Tim Stanovic and Emily Garfeo in for Carol Masser. Welcome to our audience across Bloomberg Television, radio, and YouTube. And Tim and Emily, we look at what's going on in the markets. It very much feels like a risk-off day with indexes just coming off their worst levels of the session and bonds moving higher.
Yeah, it's all about mega cap tech today, just driving down the major indices. I mean, we got shares of Alphabet lower, we got shares of Microsoft lower, we got shares of Meta Platforms lower. We're going to hear from Apple after the bell, and we're going to hear from Amazon. But I'm looking at the Bloomberg Magnificent 7 Total Return Index. It is down as we speak.
I'm Joe, visiting from San Francisco. How do you think about the role of technological advances, especially generative AI, on more traditional industries? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know anything about AI. That doesn't mean I deny its existence or importance or anything of the sort. And last year I said, you know, that we let a genie out of the bottle when we developed nuclear weapons, and that genie has been doing some terrible things lately. And the power of that genie is, scares the hell out of me. And on the other hand, I don't know any way to get the genie back in the bottle. And AI is somewhat similar. It's part way out of the bottle, and it's enormously important, and it's going to be done by somebody. So we may wish we'd never seen that genie, or it may do wonderful things. And I'm certainly not the person that can evaluate that. And I probably wouldn't have been the person that could have evaluated it during I had one experience that does make me a little nervous, and I'll just explain it. That very recently, fairly recently, I saw an image in front of my eyes on a screen, and it was me, and it was my voice, and wearing the kind of clothes I wear, and my wife or my daughter wouldn't have been able to detect any difference. And it was delivering a message that no way came from me. So when you think of the potential for scamming people, if you can reproduce images that I can't even tell, that say, I need money, it's your daughter, I've just had a car crash, I need $50,000 wired. I mean, scamming has always been part of the American scene.
That does exceed the average analyst estimate of $13.02 billion, but in terms of the outlook, $13.3 billion to $14.3 billion. Analysts were looking for somewhere in the neighborhood of $13.63 billion. This is a stock that has just taken a beating the last couple of quarters, really being disappointed when it comes to its outlook in terms of what it's saying. It had to pull its guidance. This is a company that needs to get back on course with catching up to NVIDIA and really figuring out what its strategy is going forward.
Okay, well, you've been looking at Intel. I'm looking at Amazon. Shares at Amazon are higher by about 2.5%. They're kind of bouncing around right now. The headline, though, is fourth quarter net sales coming in at 181.5 billion to 188.5 billion. The estimate was for 186, so a little on the light side when it comes to the guidance. Fourth quarter operating income coming in also a little light within the range, 16 billion to 20 billion. The estimate was for $17.49 billion. Third quarter net sales, though, did beat estimates. Third quarter AWS net sales, they came in just shy of estimates at $27.45 billion. Estimates for $27.49 billion. Third quarter operating margin coming in above estimates, though, 11%. Estimates were for 9.34%. Third quarter operating income coming in higher than expected at $17.4 billion. Estimates were for $14.75 billion. Amazon shares now in the after hours finding a direction. That one is higher up by more than 5%.
Yeah, surprising to finally see some positive movement in these big tech stocks. I'm looking looking at one that is not a technology stock, Avis Budget, ticker CAR, because they missed estimates, at least on the third quarter revenue, America's revenue, coming in at $2.64 billion versus estimates of $2.72. Adjusted EBITDA down 45% year over year. And the stock unchanged right now, but was already down 50%. That's 50% year to date. That adjusted EBITDA also missing estimates at $503 million versus estimates of 8.9. And revenue, $3.48 billion, also missing estimates.
I want to bring us back to Intel once again, Emily, and just to recap, the revenue range was quite massive, actually, $14.3 to $13.3 billion, but the estimate was at the very low end of that range, so that pleases investors. Then when you come to the operating margin, it was minus 17.8% versus positive 13.6%, so not a great figure there. And then also earnings per share, well, that was a loss, 46 cents of a loss per share versus the estimate for 41 cents year over year. That said, you are seeing a lot of positivity on the stock in the after hours trade, up more than 10%. Of course, Intel, you know, it could be a target for some companies too.
Yeah, there were reports, for instance, that Qualcomm was looking to make a bid, but it wouldn't do so until after the elections, and there was some certainty over who's in the White House and who is regulating the different agencies, who's leading the regulation agencies. In terms of commentary from the CEO, Pat Gelsinger is speaking with reporters right now, and he's talking about how Intel has taken some steps to reduce inventory in PC processors, and that, to your point, Vani, he intends to keep the company together. He says that a distinct but better together is the strategy right now. I'm not sure what that means in terms of, that sounds like corporate speak, but I'm sure there's more detail behind that. But the idea being that Intel does not want to be acquired by a bigger company, and it does want to go it alone and move forward with its plan to kind of get back on track and perhaps outsource some of its chip-making capabilities.
Shares of Intel higher by 10%, solidly in the green right now. I do want to remind everyone that there's a special edition of Bloomberg Technology tonight at 6 p.m. Wall Street time. Ed's going to be speaking with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger right here on Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, and on YouTube. I do want to go back to what Amazon is doing. It's solidly in the green as well after hours, up 5.3%. The company reported net sales for the third quarter that beat the average analyst estimates, sees net sales for the fourth quarter coming in at $181.5 billion to $188.5 billion. The estimate was for $186.36 billion. Also looking at the press release, Andy Jassy saying that he's excited about what we have in store for customers for the holiday season, saying that he kicked off the holiday season with the biggest ever Prime Deal days, and the launch of the new Kindle lineup significantly outperforming expectations. He talks about the NFL Black Friday game, Election Day coverage with Brian Williams on Prime Video, and 100 new cloud infrastructure and AI capabilities that they're going to share at AWS reInvent the week after Thanksgiving.
And of course, Tim, we think about Amazon, I'd at least do, as an e-commerce company, but let's not forget their physical stores are also a large part of the business. Net sales for physical stores up 5.4% year over year, $5.23 billion, beating estimates. And then I'm also looking at their AWS net sales. That's their cloud business, because that slightly missed estimates at $27.45 billion, still up about 20% year over year, but just slightly missing estimates.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the forecast that's impacting how these stocks are trading after hours, but we will have to see how they trade tomorrow, because if you remember, we had all sorts of volatility for Microsoft and Meta yesterday, and then we had shocking days for both of those stocks today in the wake of the sell-off on Wall Street. So will we see an even more brutal sell-off tomorrow, which obviously we'll have passed Halloween, but we'd be on All Souls Day, so maybe it's just as bad, and maybe there'll be more profit-taking before the uncertainties of next week. We'll have to see, but once again, investors liking these forecasts both for Amazon and Intel.
And one thing that they do like in particular is the operating margin, because that really reflects whether the spending on all that AI build out is hurting the profitability of the company. In the third quarter, operating margin was 11%, better than what analysts had been anticipating, which was 9.3%. And this is even as Amazon Web Services sales growth was pretty much in line. And these days, Vani, to your point, if you don't beat by a large amount, that's reason for investors to take it out on you.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened with Meta Platforms and with Microsoft. The question there was about CapEx versus how much money they're going to be spending on CapEx next year when they invest in these in doing AI and actually seeing a return on that investment from AI. And we saw what happened today. So we'll have to wait and see what we hear on the calls. I want to remind everyone, 4:30 is when we expect Apple results to cross. We're having special coverage right here on Bloomberg Radio. I know you guys are continuing to follow all the results on Bloomberg TV as well. That is going to do it for our cross-platform coverage today, this earnings bonanza. Catch us same time, same place tomorrow right here on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That is Emily Griffeo in for Carol Masser. I'm Tim Stenivek on this Halloween 2024. And it's one where we're continuing to get lots and lots of numbers. Taking a look at shares of Amazon, they are higher right now by 5%. This after the company reported net sales for the fourth quarter of $181.5 billion to $188.5 billion, and says they're seeing operating income in a range of $16 billion to $20 billion. That estimate was for $17.49 billion. Net sales online up 7.2% year over year. Physical store net sales up 5.4% year over year. AWS net sales 19% year over year increase. The coming in at $27.45 billion, pretty much in line with estimates at $27.49 billion. Let's see what James Chakmak has to say about all this and more. He's partner and tech analyst at Clockwise Capital. He joins us from Miami today. James, I do want to start with Amazon, and then we're going to get to what happened a little earlier in the week with Microsoft and Alphabet. What are your thoughts of Amazon at first blush?
Yeah, I think it's just a big story of what Andy Jassy has laid out basically about a year ago, that the path to profitability on the retail side of the business will continue and continue in a bigger and bigger way as they achieve the efficiencies across their fulfillment network and further optimize for shorter duration delivery times. So I think you're seeing what you want to see on the bottom line. The top line continues to perform more of on a status quo basis. So we continue to like the name and pretty pleased with the quarter.
I know that the results just came in minutes ago, but one big theme that we were looking at just more broadly this week is whether these big tech companies are seeing the results in their earnings from all of the CapEx that they've done on AI. What does this Amazon earnings tell us about whether Amazon is able to kind of show all of the investments, the fruit of their investments?
Yeah, I haven't gone through it with a fine-tooth comb to gauge and assess kind of the returns this quarter. But I think that from a bigger picture perspective, you're not going to see a lot of trickle down to the bottom end or accretion to revenue on a short-term basis. I think that these are much longer-term investment cycles that will bear fruit over a longer term. So, that is a question that comes up repeatedly with investors. Where's ROI? You're spending all this CapEx, but I think it just helps reinforce the competitive moats and will accrue over time. The way that we're looking at big tech more broadly is that a lot of these names have run up. We've been rotating out of these names for the last couple of weeks now, rotating into smaller cap names, more value oriented names, because you have expanded multiples, high expectations, as you saw with Microsoft, Meta. I think the correction today helped Amazon to a certain extent, that the bar had been lowered. But I think that big tech should likely remain choppy, at least for the interim, as we have uncertainties around geopolitics, the election, and just the sovereign debt situation.
So let's zoom out a little bit and talk specifically about AWS, because this is the number that everybody cares about. It was pretty amazing to see net sales up 19% year over year. We heard from Alphabet earlier this week in Google Cloud We also heard from Microsoft with Azure yesterday. Amazon with AWS, James, they're the company that started it all. What's their competitive advantage? How do they continue to win business or compete against the second and third place, Azure and Alphabet? How do they maintain their position when there is so much competition out there?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more of a rising tide lifts all boats situation. Obviously is the number one scale player in the space, and all companies that are looking to the cloud, will utilize them in some capacity. I think that the spend over AI and the shift from analog to digital will only get stronger and get faster. So all three of these companies will benefit. It's really, for us, it's around what are the expectations around those growth rates and are those reasonable? Like, for example, with Amazon, throughout the course of this year, we were expecting that growth rate to keep notching up toward the 20% number, which it has. So long as, the growth rates from an investment standpoint are, the bars are achievable, we think that, as you look into the medium and longer term, all three will benefit from it. But as far as, Amazon specific competitive advantages, obviously they're the biggest player. They continue to iterate and provide more and more services, more one-stop shop solutions. So they're going to have an edge there. Obviously, Microsoft and Google are not standing still. I think for us, it's as long as the overall industry trends toward CapEx spend and cloud spend continue to move in the right directions on a secular basis, then all three should be fine.
We've spoken to a number of guests today about the Mag 7 and whether this is a time to hold or to buy the Mag 7 or to kind of play tech and AI in different names. What do you think when you're looking at, how to play the Mag 7?
Yeah, we think that it's good to be there. For us, it's a question of what size. These companies were our top weights, a couple of quarters ago, 5, 6, 7% weights in the portfolio, but now we've trimmed those back to between 2 and 4. And we've we've exited Google, for example. We no longer hold that. And, which are much smaller in Tesla, much smaller in Amazon, Microsoft. So for us, the trends continue to be the friend of these companies, but given how much they run, we think that you hold them, but just at lower weights and reallocate that to areas that have more opportunity. Like we like software, for example. We established positions some time ago in Nutanix, GitLab, and Datadog. We think those could do well. You look at Confluence results today and last night and the stock's performance today, we think that there's a lot of opportunity there. We're going into value names at the same time. We like the commodities. We're not sure that the inflation trade is off the table.
That's interesting. I see Alcoa in here.
So, yeah, we have Alcoa, U.S. Steel, we think could be a real winner. We also like gold. So we are, we're betting on that. And value names like we added General Motors, for example. We think that could be a great stock for as we look into 2025.
Okay,
so I think that there's a lot of money to
be made
here, a lot of opportunity, but you just got to be, you just got to have sizing is so important in this market because the magnitude of the moves and the speed of the moves is only getting faster and becoming larger and larger.
Well, I want to remind everyone.
We think that portfolio sizing is so critical.
I do want to remind everyone that we're talking to you, James Chakmak, before we've heard from the Amazon call, and as we continue to await earnings from Apple, which we expect at 4:30. I do want to take this time to have you look back to what happened earlier this week and talk a little bit about Meta Platforms and Microsoft as well, which are both holdings in your Time ETF. Meta Platforms shares today ended up lower on the day after the company reported yesterday. They fell 4%. We're speaking to you Thursday afternoon. What did you make of the investor reaction to Meta's results?
Yeah, I think Meta and Microsoft are a tale of two different stories. I think with Meta, you have a situation where the CapEx expectations, were expected to come down. They didn't. Now there's more and more question marks about where 25 CapEx is. From our perspective, for us, we were thinking heading into the quarter, how short-sighted what kind of a duration of guidance is Meta likely to give on the CapEx side? And they came out with a conservative number for the fourth quarter and kind of conservative outlook for 2025. Our thinking is that in 2025, that CapEx expectation number will come down and free cash flow will surge as a result. So I think it was more of a management of expectations on Meta's part. But I think, you had a year of efficiency with Meta. Was it last year? And then I think you can have the year of cash flow with Meta next year.
Okay, so you talked Meta. I do want to get your thoughts on Microsoft as well. Shares of Microsoft today closed lower after that disappointing outlook, down 6%. Again, speaking to you Thursday afternoon, there was sort of a change of heart, or maybe it was solidified after the call late yesterday, Wall Street time. What do you think happened with Microsoft this quarter and looking forward to?
Yeah, from our perspective, Microsoft was kind of the worst report of last night. That outlook, given the valuation that Microsoft's at, that outlook left much to be desired. Puts into question the growth rate for the aggregate business, and given where the valuation is, we'd want to lean more into the lower valuation names like a Meta, like an Amazon that continues to get cheaper and cheaper. But Microsoft, we kind of let it ride last night, but they disappointed, and we think that there's more questions than answers following that forward outlook.
All right, James, we're gonna have to leave it there. James Chalkmock, he is over at Clockwise Capital. He's a partner and technology analyst joining us from Miami this afternoon. Let's talk about Intel, because shares of Intel are just surging as we speak right now. Taking a look at shares in the after hours, they were up as much as 15%, still up there, up 15.1%. This after the company gave a fourth quarter revenue forecast slightly above estimates. It sparked optimism that it's capable of reclaiming some lost market share. Shares are just absolutely surging right now. Remember, shares down going into this print, close to 60%. We got with us Ed Ludlow joining us from our San Francisco bureau. I know he's looking closely at these results because he's got a chat with Pat Gelsinger coming up at 6 p.m. Wall Street time, a special edition of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. We'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, Ed, expectations were pretty low going into this print.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpick here. It's not straightforward because in the quarter gone, Intel, which was previously like one of the world's leading chip makers, has given us a mixed bag. Its data center chips business did better than expected, but its PC business, where it has historically been the leader, did worse. The answer to that is customers had inventories and they worked through backlogs. And when we speak to Pat later, I think there's a discussion to be had about the future of Intel and the PC market. But the most important thing to note is the stock is up significantly in after hours, and that is in spite of almost $3 billion of impairment charges that Intel took relating to headcount reduction, cancelled projects. And what's so interesting about that is if you look at the estimates going into this quarter, analysts on Wall Street had not factored that in. So it's a surprise, a negative surprise. And even so, the stock is up significantly because, as you point out, the top line of the story is maybe there's some hope here for Intel.
There's also a headline, Ed, and I'm just getting caught up. I know you've had some time to look at this, but the news is coming fast and furious. They're reducing headcount by 16,500 employees. Is that on top of the other headcount reductions this year?
This is a confirmation of the previously stated plan for headcount reduction. And the literal update is that the audit committee of Intel a section of its board has approved that plan. So the number is final, 16,500 staff to be cut. And again, I go back to the impairment charges. If you look at the adjusted loss per share in the quarter gone, much, much wider than anyone on the Wall Street had anticipated. And a part of that was that the impairment charges it disclosed relative to headcount reduction, but there's other things in there. They just hadn't factored that in for this quarter. Intel wasn't able to guide for it into this quarter. So it's a timing and an accounting issue, which sometimes can be a bit dry. But there's much more to discuss.
Okay, well, speaking of much more to discuss, the Intel CEO, Pat